28th annual Nedlac Annual Summit. My name is Zingi Swalosi. I am the COSATU President from the Organized Labour Constituency. I will be your Program Director for the first session of today. I want to also apologize to the Deputy President and the Minister for what should have happened and did not happen, that we were not alerted on time on them coming in, because if that would have happened, we should have all been seated and rise as they enter this Gallagher Convention. Sincere apologies for that. I want to also welcome and recognize the Deputy President of the Republic, His Excellency Deputy President Paul Mashatile. Recognize the Minister of Employment and Labour, His Honorable Minister Thulas Nxesi, the Deputy Minister of Employment and Labour, Minister Pinky Moloi, the leaders of our social partners at Nedlac, our constituencies, and various members of different constituencies, the commissioners that are here with us, and the media. I'm not sure if the leadership, the Deputy President of the Presidential Climate Commission is here already, and I want to recognize him if he is amongst us, Utata Uvali Musa and other commissioners. Comrades, this is the first summit where the Presidential Climate Commission has been included in the summit since it has been housed start the day. May I get an indication if Mr. Thomas is here? How far? All right. I'm told Mr. Thomas is coming. After Mr. Thomas would have given us and taken us through on the safety procedures, we will then have the singing of the national anthem after. I want to also request that after the national anthem has been sung, that we remain standing for the moment of silence. That will happen after. Mr. Thomas? We're waiting on you, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thomas Messler. I am your evacuation officer for the event. And thanks for allowing me to give you a little bit of induction regarding Gallagher Convention Center. Okay, the bathrooms are situated at the main entrance, left and right respectively. The smoking area is at the bottom of the steps next to Hall 4 ramp. In case of emergency, a siren will sound. Fire marshal will announce the evacuation. That will be me. We have 2 fire escapes on my left-hand side, both of them leading to the assembly point. Our assembly point is at Richards Drive, next to the main entrance. In case of any medic emergency, our medic room is in auditorium, the venue just next door. In any other emergency, we have our event safety and security planning committee also in auditorium. And on conclusion, welcome to Gallagher Convention Center and enjoy the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. May I now request the choir to take us and lead us to the national anthem. May we all rise. Thank you very much. We may all be seated. Thank you very much to the Dibini Singers Choral Choir. At this stage, I must also make this request to all of us that we work together because we have started late. We've got time to catch up, and I'm gonna, at this stage, call upon our Minister of Employment and Labor, Minister Thulas Nxesi, to come to the podium to officiate the opening of the 28th, Nedlac 28th Annual Summit. I would not be making, for the sake of time, much introduction. I'm told in the programs that we have at the back, we have the profiles of everyone that will be speaking here today. And I want to call upon our Minister of Employment and Labor, Dr. Thulas Nxesi, to come and officiate the opening of this summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Ms. Singiswa Lucy, the COSATU President. Greetings to the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, who is also the acting President of the country as we speak, His Excellency Paul Mashatile. The ministers who are here and deputy ministers, I saw a number of deputy ministers. The deputy minister, of course, from our department, Ms. Muloy. I also saw the deputy minister of the Public Works, Deputy Berry. I also saw Deputy Minister Manamela. I might not recognize others who are here, and the overall conveners and leaders of business, labor, and community. I must recognize amongst them one of the founding members here, Professor Raymond Parsons, for also being here, and one of the key people who put this institution together at a difficult time when it was negotiated. The Nedlac and the Presidential Climate Committee Executive Directors, the members of the Portfolio Committee led by the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Employment and Labor, the distinguished guests, and the members of the media. It gives me the great pleasure to once more deliver this opening address at this gathering, the annual summit of one of the most stable and respected institutions associated with our department, which is Nedlac. Thank you for me to come and welcome you to all to this second physical annual summit of Nedlac since the pandemic. Of course, a special welcome to the Deputy President, His Excellency Paul Mashatile, who will be attending and addressing, or who's attending and addressing the Nedlac Summit for the first time. And a further welcome to the Presidential Climate Change, the PCC commissioners present here. The PCC is also a social partner body which has found a home in Nedlac up until such time as the climate change bill is passed, and it has set up its own institutional home. In the meantime, we welcome you to the Nedlac family and hope that both you and Nedlac gain from the synergies between us in relation to social partnering and the climate change. And lastly, a welcome to the new entrant to the Nedlac, that is the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, which has met the requirements to become part of the organized labor. I hope that your entrance, Zondi, will contribute to enriching and deepening the debates in the Nedlac. We're not throwing stones at each other. We're trying to seek consensus. You know, you are part of those who founded this. I appreciate the twofold nature of this annual summit. To firstly reflect on the Nedlac's performance, and secondly to consider the topical issue of how social partners should respond individually and collectively to crisis-type situations, whether they are climate-induced or of unknown origin like the earthquakes as a result of failing infrastructure and the outbreaks that are not in our control. Acting President, on Wednesday late afternoon, I met with a high-level Chinese delegation, and this was a minister of disaster and safety, not just at the workplace, but in the whole country in China, which is an indication that the issue of disasters is with us. If a country can just have a ministry focusing on that. Of course, some of the issues are about the workplace, but they are sharing a lot of what Minister of Kokta is doing in our country and what also Public Works is doing. So this issue of the disasters has become a very, very serious matter. To turn first to Nedlac's performance in 2022-23 financial year. The annual report which has been circulated here will soon be tabled in Parliament, and it reflects a job well done and an organization well managed. If members here present do not know, Nedlac received an unqualified audit with very few findings done in the previous year. Congratulations, Lisa, with your team. The opinion read with the Nedlac's performance report is welcome. We must continue to improve the performance. Over the last year, Nedlac has been able to stabilize and move back to its preeminent role of focusing on inputting in the draft policy legislation. So this year, you've commented on legislation which is sorely needed to change our economic trajectory, including relating to electricity and procurement. You've also considered bills relating to the gender-based violence and education, all pressing issues facing us. Unfortunately, there's one area of work in Nedlac where progress is just too slow, and that is the area of the labor market reform. In the early 2021, after the business, labor and government had tabled their proposals for labor law reform, I had hoped that within 6 months or 8 months, we would have reached an agreement on a number of changes that would improve the efficiency of the labor market without disturbing rights. Some of the amendments proposed by the parties included improving the functioning of the labor court and the collective bargaining, which ensured that in practice the rights of workers are realized. However, the process is ongoing and we are now too late for this parliamentary cycle. I think the leaders will realize that. There are other legislations which I should have submitted to the Deputy President and have not yet submitted because they are held in the consultative processes which tend to take too slow. I hope, however, that you continue to make the progress and use this opportunity of extra time to extend the ambit of your deliberations. This should include considering extending the rights of workers to non-standard employment relations. As an example, the gig worker or the gig economy workers and situations of remote work in the advent of the changing world of work. But I must emphasize this one, Deputy President. The issue of the backlogs in the labor court has compromised a lot of workers. And the issue there is the few judges who are overworked in the labor court. It's a very, very serious matter, which I think we've long been discussing. Unless we add the capacity of the judges, we will compromise a lot of workers. There are cases which have gone 3 to 4 years because there are no judges. This is a very serious matter we have to look at. While shifting back to inputting into the laws and policy, you have not neglected more pressing and urgent issues which require collaboration between social partners. As part of this summit, you are launching a report on the work you did when you set up a rapid response task team during the COVID pandemic, subtitled Learning the Lessons, Creating a Legacy. Last year, you tried to extend that rapid response approach to the high food and fuel prices. This is also an important issue that the social partners should remain seized with, both seeking ways to address the high prices and mitigating the impact on hunger and poverty. Nedlac has also made progress on becoming fit for purpose. This has also involved a review of the Nedlac Act, the Constitution and protocols which govern how the social partners work at Nedlac. I hope that the revised protocol approved earlier in the year is assisting the social partners to add more value to processes. The stronger the processes are to discuss the laws and policy in Nedlac, the more likely it will be that you can influence changes down the line, including in Parliament. I understand that the revisions of the Constitution and the bill, which have to be finally signed off by Nedlac Exto only in October, will make the long-awaited changes to the issues of representativity in Nedlac. So the changes put in place, they put in place stronger procedures to broaden the Nedlac's reach without diminishing the stature of the significant stakeholders in the economy and the labor market. The second focus of this summit is on social partners responding and building resilience to perilous and crisis-type situations. Just 2 months ago, we all watched in horror as part of the Bree, now Lillian Ngoyi Street in Johannesburg, collapsed in the city and was left, and the city, the inner city was left without services for many days as the different parts of government sought to work out the cause and the most appropriate response. Whether these events are natural, man-made or climate-induced, which at some point was man-made, we have to accept them as part of our new normal. We need to plan better and be more prepared. And in my own department, it requires us to have new approaches to occupational health and safety as the scope of health and safety disasters increases. I know that Matthew Parks, you have been very tough on this issue of us not submitting the issue of the amended health and safety. And it's us who have delayed as government because it did pass Nedlac. I thus welcome the focus of this summit on the sharing of lessons between the social partners on how to build resilience when responding to the crisis-type situations. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from the adversity and continue to function and thrive despite the challenges we face. It's the ability to adapt and overcome obstacles, to find new solutions and opportunities to keep moving forward. It's not about avoiding challenges, but rather about having the skills and resources to deal with them when they arise. If through collaboration at Nedlac, we can build the greater resilience amongst ourselves and in society, it is to be welcomed. Whether we call what we do social compacting, partnering or collaborating, I continue to believe that Nedlac shines as a beacon of light and it brings a message of hope in all these times, which can often be seen as dark and unpredictable. Colleagues and comrades, whether we like it or not, social compacting, which we have not yet achieved, is going to need compromises in the midst of high unemployment, in the midst of poverty and inequality. We have to move. We can't just be fundamentalist, all of us, on those issues. I wish you well in your summit and in the future deliberations at Nedlac. And I would like to thank my government colleagues and the social partners and the Secretariat for their ongoing contribution to Nedlac. But before, I will rely on the program director. And then she says, I must introduce the Deputy President, the Acting President, His Excellency Deputy Paul Mashatile. And as you all know, DP Mashatile was the Minister of Arts and Culture. And before that, he was the Premier of Gauteng in several capacities as MEC and also as Deputy Minister. And prior to his public service responsibilities in Gauteng and in the national government, he served the country as a political activist. His profile from his youth days during the apartheid is rich and shows commitment to building this united, non-racial, non-sexist democratic South Africa and a prosperous one. Deputy President, you know, in our youth days, when we were still forming NUSA, we were already leading us in the UDF. So a deeper look at the Deputy President Paul Mashatile tells the story of a dedicated, experienced, and politically mature leader. And as you are in this office, Deputy President, which happens with all the politicians, there's going to be a lot of mud thrown at you. But that is for another day. Over to you, Deputy President. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Program Director, COSATU President, Zingiswalosi, Minister of Employment and Labor, His Excellency Thulas Nesi, Honorable Deputy Ministers who are here with us. I've seen Deputy Minister Pinky Muloi, Deputy Minister Berry Swartz, Deputy Minister Buti Manamela. If the others I haven't seen, you also recognized. Nedlac and PCC Executive Directors, Honorable Members of the portfolio who may be here with us, the leadership of the various labor federations who are here, distinguished guests, members of the media, good morning to all of you. Program Director, it is a distinct honor and pleasure for me to be here today to address the 28th National Economic Development and Labor Council, Nedlac, Annual Summit, focusing on social partnership in the current context. In the scholarly publication authored by Wolfgang Strick and Anki Hasse titled The Crumbling Pillars of Social Partnership, they define partnership as follows: stable relations of mutual recognition, institutionalized cooperation, and regulated conflict between organized labor, organized business, and government. This situation and this definition underlines the intricate relationship between organized labor, organized business, and the government, highlighting the crucial role that each entity plays in fostering a harmonious and productive social ecosystem in the midst of challenges. We believe that it is through our collective effort, united in purpose and driven by our shared values, that we hold the power to influence and determine the trajectory and direction of our country. Since I became the Deputy President earlier this year, I have interacted with social partners in many different contexts, such as the recently held National Dialogue on Coalitions, an interaction with business at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and also at the Human Resource Development Council, which I chair. And this has been an endeavor to strengthen our relations and find solutions to challenges we face as a country. Today, Program Director, I'm pleased to be here at the apex body of social dialogue, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, Nedlac, which is a place where the government, business, labor unions, and community groups try to work together through problem solving and negotiations on economic, labor, development issues, as well as related challenges facing our country. Nedlac has a long history of fostering social partnership in diverse national landscapes, shaping the labor market since the dawn of our democracy. It was instrumental in the talks that resulted in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Labor Relations Act, and the Employment Equity Act. All these pieces of legislation were enacted to give effect to the rights guaranteed by the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. You, as Nedlac, have also promoted inclusion, consensus, and sustained socio-economic development in South Africa through your persistent efforts. However, our labor market has experienced several obstacles. The current conditions of the labor market is indicative of the abiding legacy of our apartheid past, which present a significant challenge today. We have inherited a labor force characterized by racial and gender inequalities, skills shortages, and high employment rates, particularly amongst Africans. COVID-19 pandemic has further intensified economic setbacks, resulting in increased unemployment and loss of jobs, affecting various groups differently and causing a complex and multidimensional phenomenon that affect different groups of people differently. Nevertheless, we are pleased to note that the unemployment rate has declined to 32.6% in the second quarter of this year, down from 32.9% in the first quarter. The best that can be said here is that the trend is heading in the right direction, albeit at a slow pace. Serious concerns such as job losses, particularly in sectors like manufacturing, persists. In this regard, organized labor, business and government, and the community sector at Nedlac have turned to each other to seek ways of turning our economy around. reversing unemployment, and building inclusive growth. This happened, as we would remember, at the Presidential Jobs Summit in 2018, and most recently in the development of an economic reconstruction and recovery plan adopted in 2020, where social partners came together to commit to actions, both individually and collectively, in response of the impact of COVID-19 on livelihoods. It is further encouraging that Nedlac social partners have taken collaboration to a new level, particularly in response to COVID-19 pandemic. For example, a rapid response task team was set up, which moved beyond the traditional role that Nedlac has continued to play. Arising out of the partnership forged in recent years, President Cyril Ramaphosa called for a social compact between government and social partners in his 2022 State of the Nation address. However, the deadline for the establishment of a written declaration of commitments and action has not yet been met. Nonetheless, since assuming the position of Deputy President, I have witnessed encouraging moves towards social compacting, such as a recent commitment by more than 15 CEOs to work with the government to reconstruct the economy. In the area of skills development, we have signed 3 social compacts through the Human Resource Development Council in the following areas. The first one, building the foundation for transformed economy and society. The second one, building the skills for a transformed economy and society. And lastly, building a capable and developmental state. These compacts support our country's most important social compact, which is the National Development Plan, which outline growth and development goals as well as the timelines. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to talk about 4 dimensions of social partnership and compacting, namely the what, the how, the who, and the why. What should we be partnering about? Nedlac has historically sought to partner about the big policy choices that face our country. We have sought to follow an example of social democratic countries elsewhere that agreed, for example, to trade off wage increases for job stability. However, in South Africa, where unemployment is so high, and those who work support many of those who do not, this type of trade-off may be difficult to attain. The most pressing challenge appears to be one about ideological positioning among the social partners in respect of the path to growth, which have not shifted despite the enormous crisis the country faces. We must summon enough bravery and courage to discuss these matters openly in order to prevent the ticking time bomb of poverty, inequality, and joblessness from going off. This is not impossible to achieve. Through the presidency, Business for South Africa has initiated an important partnership with government, with its focus on 3 critical areas of energy, logistics, and crime. It has offered to bring in resources and expertise to accelerate progress and address the current impediments on economic growth. The government is pleased with this development, as it is a direct result of the successful partnership and collaborative efforts of Nedlac. Which therefore brings me to the who question. Who should form social partnership and social compacts? Program Director, I do not believe that there is a finite list of stakeholders that can be eligible, nor that all social compact must be tripartite or tripartite plus one. For example, the sector master plans on sugar, agriculture, clothing, retail, and more recently the renewable energy sector often has many signatories, including partners that are not national in character or not even in Nedlac, but can bring something or gain something from committing to a common plan. The more important question to answer is whether the parties to the social compact can obtain a mandate from their constituencies and whether they have the capacity to fulfill their commitments. Because when this does not happen, social compacts can amount to nothing but talk shops, something we must avoid at all costs. On the how question, recently in the National Dialogue on Coalition Governments, which was held in the Western Cape, several countries that we invited shared their experiences with us on coalition building. A coalition government or coalition agreement is not dissimilar to a social compacting agreement, where there are needs, there's a need to also have a give and take, but also importantly define roles and responsibilities and agree on what to do together. Program Director, these comparative experiences I refer to basically deals with issues of principle, trust building, transparency, pragmatism, and patience. These are principles which are codified in the work of Nedlac. There is an opportunity for Nedlac and its social partners to share these across society while also recognizing that they cannot be taken for granted and in fact need to be reinforced in each and every social compact. Nedlac has a responsibility to demonstrate to the nation that there can be win-win situations and that we can proceed with the best potential or least worst outcomes. We are facing a changing world where the impact of climate change is increasingly felt by all of us, whether it is the possibility of flooding, as we have seen in KwaZulu-Natal, or drought in places like the Eastern Cape. High temperatures in Uppington in the Northern Cape, making it impossible to cultivate fields, but also poor quality of air, which we have experienced in places like in Mpumalanga. This tells us, ladies and gentlemen, that climate change is here with us. The government's response has been to prepare for a just transition from the world as we know it today to the one which is friendlier to the environment and ultimately gives our children a safer future. We have been ably assisted in this task by the Presidential Climate Commission, which has provided key recommendations to the President to implement and has worked tirelessly to build social compacts with stakeholders at the national, provincial, and local level. I'm glad that they will be also making a presentation here. It will only be through partnerships that we can ensure that everyone is supported to transition to new employment or better livelihoods and provided with the necessary social support mechanisms. If not, those that are negatively affected now may resist this transition, but that will happen to the detriment of future generations. I am sure, Program Director, that the tradition of social partnership by Nedlac are being carried forward by the PCC while focusing on new issues that require new tactics that can be shared by social partners and stakeholders. Participative policy initiatives that search for and build consensus with key players in society have a good chance of sustainable implementation. It is important for Nedlac social partners to seize the opportunity of celebrating 30 years of democracy and reflect on past achievements, assess the current situation, and voice their opinion on how the government should tackle major policy issues in the next decade. In addition, social partners should focus on preparing for and building resilience in the face of challenges, especially in areas of healthcare crisis, natural disasters, deteriorating infrastructure, and rising levels of disruptive crime and vandalism. The reality is that some terrible aspects of our country cannot be wished away. Instead, we must indeed prepare for these crises to preserve lives and livelihood, and then address systematic challenges, as I've referred to climate change, and also ensure improvement to water access, particularly in rural communities. Program Director, in closing, let me quote Martin Luther King, who once said the following: "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenges and controversy." Close quotes. I'm sure the women in the room will say, I should say, the ultimate measure of a man and a woman. In our times, we can't leave our women behind. So we can refine this quote of Martin Luther King and say the ultimate measure of a man and a woman is not where he or she stands in moment of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. I do hope that arising from the deliberations later this morning, you will emerge out of this summit wiser and more determined, more resilient to stand and deal with the challenges of our era. Program Director, I have decided to stay here until the end of the summit. Because program director has already indicated that it's my first time. So I actually don't know what Nedlac is. So I should stay here, hear you out, and participate. However, there is only one small problem. The president is at G20 in India, and he had asked me to attend to some pressing matters, so I have to be somewhere at 1:30. But I'm hoping that by that time we should be close to the end. Yeah, actually Lisa promised that. We should be. But I wish you fruitful deliberations, and may Nedlac grow stronger and stronger. We need you.
Thank you very much to the Honorable Minister and His Excellency, the Deputy President, who is the Acting President of the Republic of South Africa, Ntate Paul Mashatile, as they exit the stage to take their rightful places. And we are really thankful and grateful, President, that you are remaining with us during our deliberations. I want to also say, as I call upon our Executive Director at Nedlac, Comrade Lisa Seftel, to come to the stage with the leaders of the social partners. I want to call upon the CEO of Business Unit South Africa, Mr. Kas Kovadia, Community Overall Convener, Mr. Tulani Chefuta, and Labor Overall Convener, Mr. Gerald Twala, to come on stage. And I want to say, Minister, that one of the things that I picked when you spoke, which I hope that it will help us on how we move forward, is the backlog at the Labor Court. It is a serious issue, but it then gets to be there's something that starts before you get to the Labor Court. It is the CCMA. And the austerity budget cuts at the CCMA is giving us more headache and more problems even before you get to the Labor Court. So one believes that we need to have a conversation on how we're going to address that issue of the austerity budget cuts, in particular as it relates to the CCMA, because the most vulnerable workers who would not even afford a lawyer at the Labor Court, when they can't get the services that are required at the CCMA, then they are as good as not having even benefited from the labor laws of this country. Comrades and friends, the second part of our program will be focusing on social preparedness and resilience when confronting crisis-type situations such as COVID pandemic and the climate-induced crisis like flooding. This will be the second part of our program. But one lesson that we have learned from COVID is the one that we're applying here today. The session of today is both physical and virtual, so we're having a hybrid 28th Nedlac Annual Summit. And I think it is important for us to recognize and acknowledge that there are those that are joining us from their comfort of their offices or homes. Whilst we may notice that the chairs here are not full, it is because others have learned lessons from COVID of social distancing and being able to multitask whilst addressing these issues, and they are able to get to other parts of their programs. Now I'm going to call upon the Nedlac Executive Director. stage of being here physically. I want to call upon, without wasting time, the Executive Director of Nedlac, Ms. Lisa Seftel, to come and deliver the Nedlac Performance 2023 report, including an overview of the COVID-19 report. Can I also indicate that due to time constraints, that when the Nedlac Executive Director is done, when I start calling upon our social partners, I will be taking my chair right there. I won't be coming back to the podium after I would have intervened after the Nedlac Executive Director. And our Nedlac, our leaders of constituencies will then follow each other in responding to the performance of Nedlac. So I want, without wasting any time, call upon our Executive Director, Ms. Lisa Seftel, to deliver the Nedlac Performance 2022-2023 report, including an overview on the COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and Deputy President, Minister, Deputy Ministers, leaders of business, labour, community and government, guests. I hope that my report comes on screen and that, okay, I can see that. Thank you very much. If you can go to the next slide. Oh, I must click. Maybe just while I am trying to click, just to indicate that part of us going hybrid is also trying to go smarter. And on your program, there's a QR code. And if you take a photo of the QR code, that's where you should get copies of our annual report, of the COVID report, of the detailed bios of everybody who is speaking today. So I'm going to start off by talking about the current context. And I think we are all familiar with the fact that we're facing a situation where our GDP growth has declined, and unfortunately, the prospects of improvement are low. Similarly, this slide tells us that the number of employed people in South Africa remains dismally low. And I thought this slide was also interesting. Once a month, we produce employment and economic indicators that only half of women of working age are working. There has, however, been an increase in professional women, but a decline in the number of workers, particularly domestic workers in unskilled employment. Again, and this is something that has concerned particularly the business community and has implications for jobs, South Africa is no longer an attractive investment destination, and that yellow line does look scary. Then, and we have looked at this a lot this year in Nedlac, is high inflation, particularly food inflation, continues to disproportionately impact the poorest people. Now, when we look at our situation, we are facing both short-run and long-run constraints to growth. We were all shocked this year when a study, I think the Peers study, revealed that only 19% of grade 4s can read for meaning. And the other challenge that we face is that the amount of investment that we give in education is not proportionate to the outcomes that we experience. This is no secret, but it is important to visually look at the increase in the amount of load shedding, which discourages investment and dampers growth. Fortunately, and this has been a big trend this year, is that energy provision is diversifying. Now, one thing that has been affected all of us, and even in Nedlac, we've had to confront this, is that debt and debt service costs crowd out essential government spending, and all of us, I'm not sure which is the government row here, we are all being asked to reduce the amount of money that we can spend over the next 3 years. The real challenge is how we're going to do more with less. Now, I think it's also important for us as we welcome the PCC that climate change is an ever-increasing reality, and this graph shows how temperature is increasing. And I also thought the next slide was useful, which is not moving. There we go. That in South Africa in particular, we are warming at roughly the twice rate of the global average, which has significant implications for agricultural output and displacement of people. Then, as the Deputy President referred to, and the Minister, we are experiencing unforeseen events with greater frequency. The first picture shows the slime dam disaster in the Free State. Doesn't look good. It looks like the moon or something out of our lived experience. And the second picture is Bree Street. Now, and this is really something that it's hard to say, but I think it's important to say. When I share with you these figures, let us rather confront the fact, as the Prime Minister of Barbados said at the Nelson Mandela lecture last year, that we are facing a polycrisis. It is better to acknowledge the situation that we're in so that we can act on the basis of a realization of how hard things are than to try and deny it. And she said, we live in a world that is very strange at a moment in time. It is a polycrisis because as soon as you're accustomed to managing one crisis, you're hit by another and another and another. And that is what it's felt like in the last few years. So, and this is the theme of this summit, because a polycrisis requires a poly response. And as South Africans, as social partners, as individuals, and as Nedlac, we are called upon to respond. And I've identified 3 areas: systemically and proactively, in the long run. That's where we need to continue to have visions of spatial integration, employment, quality education. But we also have to respond reactively to the current crises of energy, logistics, and inflation. And then with increased resilience and preparedness for the unforeseen, and but not necessarily unanticipated. So my presentation will focus really on what we've done, and as has been indicated, the second session is where we've invited many of our partners and representatives of our partners to look at how we can be more prepared. So for those of you in Nedlac, you're familiar with this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. If we characterize the year under review, it's really about closing off the COVID responses and social compacting rather than a single social compact, as I think the Deputy President was talking about. The PCC joining Nedlac. I think on some areas we have really got to grips with key bills, and we have shifted from collaboration back to more work on policy. I won't go, I think we've all talked about this many times. There's the PCC with the President. Then I'm going to now look at some of the areas that we've worked on. On economic matters, we focused on a number of bills, including the Electricity Amendment Bill, which is now before Parliament, but as we've heard, may not be passed at this session. We are still busy, almost finalized electricity pricing policy. And then we've had a number of dialogues on contemporary issues relating to economic matters. We also have an energy security work stream. We had a meeting this week. I think there were 50 people there, beginning to look at all the key issues facing the energy crisis. Then the Trade and Industry Chamber is a very active chamber with very many different issues. There is Tesalika, which has been particularly active this year because of the initiatives around AGOA and WTO and so on. We have worked on freight and public transport, and then energy security, and on trade, industry, and SMMEs. This hasn't been such a active area this year, but there have been a lot of engagements. Then, in the labour market, as the Minister said, a lot of work has been done on the labour reform process, although there's not a lot of outcomes, which again means now that we have to take the labour law reforms into the next administration. But we did consider the Public Service Amendment Bill and the Public Administration Management Amendment Bill, as well as the Mine Health and Safety Amendment Bill, and those, as I understand, at least the two of them, which are quite important in terms of professionalisation of the public service, did come to Nedlac and should be in Parliament. On other labour market matters, we continue to have an oversight role around, can I say, the modernisation of the Unemployment Insurance Fund, and the Section 77 Standing Committee. There's one item that we're struggling with, which is about lack of services in the Eastern Free State. Although now we have a system where the Labour use the same certificate every time, because they keep saying the economic crisis is ongoing, and whenever there is a socio-economic protest. On the social and the development chamber, we also looked at a lot of bills, and I think we can definitely say that bills do not come to Nedlac to die. They are very quickly processed, and input is given. Also on another policies, particularly, see, I'm not talking so much because I can't see. But that's my fault because the writing is so small, but I hope that you can see and you can go with your QR code and look at the detailed presentation, which will be on the document shortly. But you can see the wide range of issues. This is an important issue. This is not an issue which we've made a lot of progress, but I am hoping that we can make progress. And the Deputy President referred to the fact that sometimes diverse partnerships can produce results. And just recently, we have somebody who comes to our meetings who's not a formal partner from a donation organization called Food Forwarders. And we're really trying to make progress with them and the Department of Health to ease the regulatory environment or create certainty on the regulatory environment around food donations. And again, Department of Health is not usually our usual partner, although they've been important in the last few years, but just being able to bring people together and all of a sudden there's a click and people can see how government and business can work together to be able to reduce hunger. Now, on the COVID-19 Rapid Response Task Team, we felt it was very important that there's a dignified and closeout of COVID. And so we have this report today, which again you can find on through your QR code, which is about learning the lessons and creating a legacy. And then we have this legacy program, which I hope those of you that have been involved in occupational health and safety participate in, where there's flyers, there's videos, and there's webinars, not only on how to deal with COVID, but how to deal with respiratory issues and how to do with risk assessments. I'm sure, Mr. Minister, of Employment and Labour, you'll agree with me that occupational health and safety is increasingly more important, and it's very important that all of us, not only the traditional sectors like mining and construction, do risk assessments. So what are the key takeaways from this report? And you'll read the report. It's not all a good news story. We did some really good things, but we could have done better. And as we go forward, we need to do better. We need to make sure that we rely on science, rational and evidence-based. We need to update our prior assumptions. We need to be more agile and flexible. And there's a point here about the ban on alcohol, that it's not ideal to ban cigarettes and ban alcohol. Rather, those need dedicated policy responses. And then, of course, we all learned very serious lessons about procurement, emergency procurement, and I heard the President also saying that that was one of his regrets, that there was unanticipated looting with the procurement process, but there was also an opportunity that was not taken up, and I'm sure Labour will agree with me, around localization, that we could have advanced as part of a crisis response. Then further on, these are really the recommendations that, again, we need to pay more attention to health and safety, we need greater trust, and that there is work to be done, and particularly as we move to some of the issues of climate change. The Unemployment Insurance Fund and income replacement for a just transition, and having a strong mechanism for doing that is very important. And then I think there were not only lessons that we learned, or that were learned for government, but I think the social partners and business in particular learned the importance of these solidarity fronts and building institutions like Business for South Africa, like the Nedlac Community Trust, which were dedicated institutions to be able to build resilience for pandemics. I'm now just going to talk a little bit about the PCC. They had really three key outputs. The first is that they'd made policy recommendations around nationally determined contribution. They updated it, the Just Transition Framework. They also analysed the disaster response in KZ and the Eastern Cape drought and an urban transition policy. They built scientific knowledge around the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is very serious for us because it's going to have an impact on jobs, particularly in the automotive sectors, and a just transition funding mechanism. And they did a lot of advocacy. They had national events, dialogues, as well as provincial events, because those of you involved in the just transition, especially in Mpumalanga, they're very strong. Nothing about us without us. So it was very important on these difficult questions to go and be inclusive and speak to people at all levels of society. Then we have also a program in Nedlac, which is about building the capacity of social partners. This continued with the policy schools and leadership training and so on. As a secretariat, we continue to improve our communication and our knowledge management. We now, for example, have a Nedlac newsletter called Nedlac Connect. Then we have also made, I think as was referred to, progress around revising our Nedlac bill, our constitution, and protocol for issues. What we've really tried to do here is modernize our legislation, update it, create more flexibility, and set out clearer admission and termination criteria and processes. Then we also have got involved in measuring our performance, as we now have a parliamentary tracker. It's not a good story, but it is an important story that since 2015, the bills that were signed into law are 30% of all the bills that came into Nedlac, but some of them are also, some were withdrawn for good reason. The chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee is also here, and sometimes Parliament also spends a lot of time for good reason on some of the legislation. Then we also do a stakeholder satisfaction survey, and the average of that is 73%, which we think can be better. We aim for 75, but you can see on some of the issues like our operational structures, systems and processes, we get very good feedback from all of you. We also received, as the Minister said, an unqualified audit opinion, and you can see lots of green. Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, that's something that you in particular like to see. Now, moving forward, this again is a hard thing to say, but I think it needs to be said. We face an existential crisis. When we had the budget planning dialogue, it was well attended, addressed by the Minister of Finance. We could all agree on symptoms. We all complain all the time, rightly so, or we point the load shedding, the energy crisis, the logistics crisis. We could mostly agree about what we have to do in the short term, what we have to do about the ports, what we have to do about load shedding. But we do not agree on the systemic long-term program to turn the economy around. We do not have the same economic vision for the future. And that's what makes it difficult to have the big trade-off. But because we're in a polycrisis, that shouldn't stop us from continuing to build, as the Deputy President was saying, understanding and trust, responding to key issues, representing the best interests of your constituencies, especially in the context of adversity. And that really is the existential crisis, but the poly response. So these are the things that we are talking about in Nedlac. How do we pursue new forms of social compacting with a diverse group of social partners? How do we continue, because in this world of fake news, and because we don't often concentrate longer than what's on our Twitter feed, to be able to share good information and experiences. That's what we learned from COVID. Getting good information builds understanding and better decision making. Facilitating listening and understanding of the experiences of the majority of the people. And that's where the PCC is really leading us. Support the building of preparedness and resilience in the face of unanticipated crises. Doing more with less. And the point made by the Deputy President, demonstrate that trust can happen with differences and role model such behavior in society. And this is important as we so many of our municipalities dealing with difficult coalition issues. In the yellow thing, it's not that clear, at least for me, but I was very impressed with the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. I'm not sure if the CEO is here, Zintle, but she put an odd, and she was talking about how business are taking on the need for resilience planning. And that really is my message today. I would like to extend a big thank you to the leadership of the social partners, to all of those that attend the Nedlac meetings, now majority online, to the staff that continue to work against all odds, should I say. Yes, let me leave it at that. I think I've thanked everybody. If I haven't thanked anybody, then let me thank you.
Thank you, ED, and again, congratulations. I must say that as I would be calling upon our social partners to reflect on the report, that part of what you spoke about in the report, and I think South Africans, we are in that conversation on the transition with regards to energy, and we are saying it must be a just transition. And you spoke about the rails and roads, the ports, and I asked myself, are we in the discussion about a just transition from roads to rail? Are we ready for that, or we shall wake up when the truck drivers are saying correctly that we must fix Transnet? But what becomes of ourselves when we can no longer end businesses in the transport and logistics are saying what becomes the future of ourselves as we fix the state-owned entities? So I'm just saying that part of what I think we should be moving in as a conversation is a just transition, including on those areas of road to rail. I'm going to call upon our leaders of social partners to come and reflect on the Nedlac performance in 2022-2023 And as I've said, due to time constraints, I'm going to call them now, so they are going to come to the podium one after the other. The first that will be coming to the podium will be the CEO of Business Unit South Africa, Mr. Cas Covadia, who will be followed by the Community Overall Convener, Mr. Tulas Chefuta, and the last one who will be coming to the podium after Tulani. Hey, Tola. Tulani Chefuta. And the last one would be the Labour Overall Convener, Mr. Gerald Twala. In that sequence, and I want to call upon the first to reflect, Mr. Cas Covadia.
Thank you, Program Director. Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Minister and Casey, other ministers and deputy ministers present, the Nedlac Executive Director, leadership of all the constituencies, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, both physically and online. Let me start by, on behalf of business, commending the continued good performance of Nedlac in the last few years under the leadership of the Executive Director, Ms. Lisa Seftel and her team. It's quite clear what can be achieved by dedicated leadership as well as skilled and motivated staff, and that's what we're seeing. The report highlights a number of issues and starts with highlighting the crises we face in South Africa across a very broad front. And as business, we would certainly identify with that. The report points out a series of crises ranging from decreasing GDP to increasing inflation, increasing unemployment, especially amongst the youth, increasing public debt and debt servicing costs. All of this is exacerbated by ongoing load shedding, deteriorating security conditions in the law and order area, the impact of climate change, and ongoing constraints to growth. This toxic mix has led to South Africa no longer being an attractive investment destination. And business is absolutely clear that without investment, on the back of which we build inclusive growth, we can't address these crises that we see. And what the crises also show is that there's a downward trend in all of the key indicators. And if we don't arrest that and start turning those around, we just can't address the problems that we have in this country. The geopolitical dynamics globally are also very volatile. And critical developments like the Russia-Ukraine war, our position on foreign policy, and some of the rhetoric around an otherwise valid move toward building a South Bloc are all impacting negatively on our country. And we need to, in all of these engagements, the geopolitical engagements, we need to consider very, very carefully and seriously what is good for South Africa and act accordingly and respond accordingly and plan accordingly. We note some critical progress in Nedlac's performance, particularly the decision by the PCC to join Nedlac, albeit on a temporary basis. The work of the governance task team that's been working away for quite some time to review Nedlac's founding documents to make the institution future fit and ensure proper representation, mandates, and positioning. The stakeholder satisfaction survey shows that 73% of stakeholders are happy with the performance, and that's a good reflection. Although the ED say they want to reach 75%, which is great, but 73% is a good reflection. The achievement of an unqualified audit opinion for the third year in a row with reduced findings. This is important in an environment of growing fiscal constraints and in an environment where many of our municipalities and other structures in government are nowhere near clean audits. Notwithstanding the good performance in the last period, we must ask the following questions. What does the future hold for Nedlac, and what are the critical considerations that will shape it? And the ED referred to some of those. In responding to that, let us say the following. South Africa has not seen decent levels of GDP growth since 2007, the year just before the global financial crisis, where 5.4% growth was achieved. Since then, we have had several crises with no growth. The load shedding crisis that continues today and is expected, according to Reserve Bank projections, to deduct as much as 2% from GDP growth in 2023 is a severe crisis. The state capture crisis, which took place over a period of more than a decade, and all the damages it caused, and both the financial and other damage it caused. The Marikana disaster, which claimed 44 lives and marked perhaps the lowest point in our industrial relations in the country. The logistics and transport crisis that is destroying growth and jobs, and the program director referred to the Transnet issue just now. The debilitating high levels of crime and corruption, which are impacting on all sectors of society, not just business, but on all sectors of society, and we seem to be powerless as a state to actually deal with that. Infrastructure failures across the board, leading to the outbreak of cholera in Hammanskraal earlier this year. And then very recently, the death of 77 people in one building in Johannesburg, and the seeming inability of the state to deal with this, to deal with hijacking. And what should we be doing? We shouldn't be saying that law or a particular law stops us from dealing with it. Follow the money, see who is getting the money for these hijacked buildings, and deal with them. It's as simple and as, for want of a better term, as simple as that. Just deal with it. And that's what the state should be doing. So we need to address these crises very quickly. All of this must challenge us to reflect deeply on our model of engagement as social partners. And I think that's one of the reasons that the governance task team has been looking at Nedlac, because we need to respond as social partners and engage to address the current context and the current crises. And we haven't been through that process at Nedlac since its inception. And that is why the governance task team work is absolutely critical. The crises we have talked about should not be happening in a normal society. We can't. We've reached a stage in our society where we say 50 deaths today, 72 deaths last week, and we just shrug our shoulders and we carry on. That is not a normal society. It cannot be a normal society. And we must not allow that to be a normal society. So it shouldn't be happening in a normal society. How can we continue with the same mode of engagement when things are falling apart? And Lisa talked about us not reaching consensus on a vision for fundamental growth in our country. We've got to reach that consensus. We've got to begin to get out of our comfort zones far more robustly than we do currently, all of us. And although Nedlac may not have all the answers, it is the perfect platform for all social partners to raise and address these tough questions. And we need to ensure that Nedlac works. But we need to be absolutely clear about what it can do and what it can't do. Business considers the following to be critical in addressing these issues. Nedlac must ensure that it is fit for purpose, to be relevant in the current context and the challenges we face today and that we will face in the next decade. And we need to have those discussions at Nedlac. And it's got to be fit for purpose for those discussions. It must be a forum for social dialogue and focus on programs on which there is the greatest scope of collaboration across stakeholders, instead of being a conflictual forum. and a conflictual platform. For social partners to be sitting at Nedlac and spending most of our time arguing and being in conflict with each other in these abnormal circumstances in society, history will judge us for that. So it's got to be a platform for collaboration across the social partners. The ED in her report talks about social compacting, and the Deputy President talked about social compacting. We would agree with that. This thing in our country to build grand social compacts. Where did we get to last year on the social compact? As of the end of last year, I think we were on version 11 of a document to try and agree on what we're talking about. So with all due respect, business's view is that we actually spent a year on that when we should have been talking about what we can do through social compacting on particular issues and particular crises, like we showed in the COVID issue. On public policy matters, Nedlac must facilitate as much agreement as possible amongst social partners. But we cannot try to reach consensus at all costs. We cannot continue to spin wheels at Nedlac. We just cannot continue to do that. And so if we don't reach consensus on policy, if we don't reach consensus on things, let's agree to disagree. There are other processes in Parliament and elsewhere that social partners can use to make their views known. And then it's up to government to actually decide how they finalize that policy. But let's not continue to spin wheels at Nedlac on these issues. Where appropriate, Nedlac must recognize and appreciate progress on matters through bilateral engagements and seek to add value to those. Again, the Deputy President referred to this. That social compacting can happen in very, very many different ways. It can happen bilaterally, trilaterally, multilaterally, so long as we are generally moving in a direction that begins to address the crises we have. And let's work on that and let's support wherever social compacting happens. In conclusion, let me refer again to the report presented by the ED. It talks about Nedlac facing an existential crisis and an existential risk. We agree with this. It will continue to face an existential risk if it does not, and social partners do not, respond and be proactive about giving guidance to addressing the crises we have in the country today and for future-proofing this country against those crises happening in 10 years' time. And if Nedlac is not able to be the platform where social partners talk about that, then Nedlac does face an existential risk. It is thus critical for Nedlac to grapple with its role, its positioning, its mandate, and its value add. If there's no value add, then Nedlac shouldn't be there. And we need to ask that hard question, just like other organizations. We are convinced that Nedlac must grow and must get stronger, but we've got to face these questions. We have mentioned above some of the critical issues to be addressed if Nedlac is to avoid an existential crisis. Finally, the ED talks about the world being in a poly-crisis, and this requires a poly-response. South Africa also faces a poly-crisis of sorts, and Nedlac must respond accordingly. In an environment of dwindling budgets, we appreciate that Nedlac will need to actively prioritize to maximize its response and impact. As business, we will continue to play our part to ensure Nedlac's continued success, and we wish the rest of the summit well. Thank you.
Program Director and all colleagues, thank you very much. I was still expecting you, President, to come and welcome. I forgot you said omnye emva komnye. So let's rise on the already established protocols in this meeting and convey our greetings to everyone who is here. We welcome the opportunity to participate in this 28th Nedlac Annual Summit under the theme of resilience in the face of adversity, social partners' preparedness to manage crises. We can bear witness to the fact that various aspects of our national life have rolled over from crisis to crisis in many fronts, but we are still standing, although the ground is shaking. Social dialogue, compacting, and collaborative effort have been some of the contributors to finding solutions to these challenges. And on its own, this should be an acknowledgement that as social partners, we should be having different but complementary roles that we should be playing in finding solutions to the crises we're facing in our national development. In circumstances of crisis, community-based civil society organizations, we believe, should be supported to provide immediate, responsive interventions. If left to government alone, some of these interventions may be trapped into bureaucracy right from inception and therefore be rendered too late, if not redundant. The agility that comes with the positioning, the location, the responsiveness, and the agility of civil society organizations should be an existing social capital that is leveraged to the maximum for the benefit of our people in communities. In this period, like others, Nedlac has continued to redefine and assert its role as the center of social dialogue in South Africa. In pursuit of repositioning its relevance, Nedlac continues to take up on tasks and roles that far exceed its legislated founding mandate. And we can assert that there is no living organism that remains static, hence the evolution of Nedlac as well. In this year that we are reporting on, Nedlac has been seized with various issues of national importance, where social partners combined their efforts to find solutions to the pressing national challenges. In this period, Nedlac convened dialogue sessions focusing on issues such as the government budget planning, electricity generation, public employment schemes, and food distribution to vulnerable groups and communities. In the development chamber, where we are pigeoned to participate, we have dealt with issues of strategic interest to the people and the communities, which issues relate to the white paper on social development, the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide draft bill, the amendments to the regulations relating to minimum uniform norms and standards for public schools infrastructure, the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, and the Presidential Employment Intervention Initiative. In this period, Nedlac, our organization, has registered a whopping 12% performance increment from 66% in the previous year to 78% in the current year. And that goes to show that the unqualified audit that we're celebrating is not a hollow achievement. It is accompanied and buttressed by improved performance of 12%, which is highly commended to the Executive Director and the entire Secretariat team. In the same period, the community constituency has been continuing with its endeavors of capacity building and repositioning its base as the broad representative voice of civil society. We were able to convene a workshop to consider the implementation modalities of the Presidential Social Sector Summit side by side with the Department of Social Development. And the broadening of this base of civil society acknowledges that if we were to be stuck to the stale and outdated founding documents of Nedlac, the representatives of NPOs that are here would not be here. The representatives from faith-based organizations led by Arch Shole would not be here. And many other sectors, including traditional leaders that are here, that would not be here. All that we are setting by this broad base of our representation, Minister, is that it changes to the Constitution and the Act. This is Asfumana Pambi. And with all of that, we are making a very simple statement that the exclusionary and elitist nature of Nedlac must just fall. In an environment where we are actually calling for a dialogue where we leave no one behind, we are being left right at the door. Sikhomfwa sesiphila sesihleli, in effect. The community constituency concluded the 2022-23 year by hosting its annual civil society policy school that was held right at the end of March 2023 under the theme of building and repositioning the civil society voice for advancing socio-economic transformation. The policy school was attended by a broad range of national civil society formations across various sectors of organizing and mobilization. The policy school is convened as a platform where we give an account of the work that we have done in the previous year at Nedlac, and using it as a platform for strategic planning and taking mandate on issues that will be in the agenda of Nedlac and issues that we should champion for the year ahead. In the 2022 State of the Nation address, President Ramaphosa challenged Nedlac social partners to work on a new consensus and develop a social compact. And he asserted that we have given ourselves 100 days to finalize a comprehensive social compact to grow our economy, create jobs, and combat hunger. It is important to acknowledge that collectively, we have not risen up to this challenge, despite crucial mandate it entails in responding to the multiple and intersectional crises confronting our society. We believe that social partners can still commit to collective actions to achieve higher levels of investment, growth, increased employment, and expanding support for the unemployed and tackle poverty. Poverty is real, and poverty is deepening. It must feature prominently in our national agenda and the agenda of Nedlac. In order to unleash our potential to attract investments, grow the economy, create employment, and fight poverty, we must double or even triple our efforts to address the cross-cutting binding constraints in the areas of energy, water, skills, broadband data, transport, and logistics. And we firmly believe that if these binding constraints are addressed, they immediately change to be critical enablers for attracting investment, growing the economy, creating employment, and addressing poverty. The structural transformation towards a developmental, inclusive, and resilient economy requires a review, undoubtedly, of our macro and microeconomic policies. That will be based on a call for reindustrialization processes that reduce human vulnerability and ecological degradation. In light of the contribution it makes in the lives of the people, we welcome and appreciate the continued extension from that. When space is provided, we are going to dispel the myth that these forms of grants stand in direct juxtaposition to economic growth. Any economic theory that argues that is blind to the fact that this is money that is spent to stimulate more demand that creates more employment in the very same economy. But when that time comes, we're going to argue that. It must not be acceptable that every time when interventions have to benefit the poorest of the poor, some amongst us define themselves a role of arguing, it is too expensive, we cannot afford it. The delays in the conclusion of the work of our governance task team should concern all of us because they hold back Nedlac from being the relevant, responsive, representative and fit for purpose institution it could become. In the current configuration, the people, through their organizations of civil society, continue to be relegated to be cases of welfare in the development chamber, to the exclusion of our voices on economic issues in other chambers of Nedlac. Again, we argue that the exclusionary elitism must fall. South Africa will be going to the 7th democratic national and provincial elections in 2024, taking us straight into 30 years of democracy, as the Deputy President has already asserted. This will also mark 28 years of our Constitution. This should challenge all of us to ponder and reflect over the journey we have traversed towards the progressive realization of socio-economic rights as provided for in the Bill of Rights of our Constitution. We believe that the progressive realization of socio-economic rights should remain the pulling effect of our endeavors to position social dialogue as a process of finding solutions to our pressing and long-standing national challenges. If not carefully contained, the low levels of voter turnout may grow to challenge the very legitimacy of the elected government and later on the state as a whole. Nedlac must take interest in the agenda of consolidating our democracy. Hence, we commend the Deputy President Paul Mashatile for including Nedlac social partners in the dialogue about coalition governments. As we conclude this input, we do want to note that this is a summit like no other. This is a summit where we bid farewell to the longest-serving overall convener of Labour, Comrade Beki Nchali, and we wish him well. We also bid farewell to one of the astounding negotiators of government. I only learned that Farid Adams is a doctor 2 weeks ago. And we also use the same opportunity to welcome SAF to strengthen the voice of the left in the discussions that are unfolding. Siyabonga.
Program Director, thanks very much to you, President Zing Salosi, to His Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic, Paul Mashatile, the Minister of Employment and Labour, Tulas Ngesi, the Executive Director of Nedlac, Lisa Seftel, the leadership of government, organized labor, business, community, and the broader Nedlac fraternity. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you as we mark this important occasion of the 28th Nedlac Annual National Summit on behalf of organized labor. Today is a moment for us to collectively reflect on what we have and have not been able to achieve over the past years. Nedlac remains a model for social compacting throughout our continent and the world. More importantly, it must continue to serve as a rallying point for us to deliberate together on the challenges we must endeavor to overcome in our country. At times, some forget why we gather under the Nedlac umbrella. Our fundamental mandate at all times is to resolve the ticking time bomb of unemployment. No society can sustain itself when 4 out of 10 citizens, 6 out of 10 youth cannot find a job. We cannot be proud as a nation when we remain the most unequal in the whole world. No, when, despite of all our efforts since 1994, we witness rising levels of poverty. It is worse when we reflect on the damage the state capture has done to the state and economy, and our legacies of apartheid have done to our moral fabric as a nation. We have no excuse for these setbacks when we consider South Africa's natural endowment, our infrastructure, and our people's passion for work. Some critics attempted to mock Nedlac as a place where policies go to die. The facts and experience of millions of workers and businesses tells a different story. 6 million farm, domestic, construction, retail, fuel, security, and other workers who not long ago were paid as little as 6 rand an hour are today entitled to the national minimum wage of 25 rand 42 cents. This is not a living wage, but a foundation from which we will now seek to raise the minimum wage to the level of a living wage. Whilst we applaud this achievement, we need to do better to raise compliance levels to 100%. Organized labor is proud of the relentless efforts and synergy of minds we demonstrated as Nedlac community during the pandemic to ensure that we released over 64 billion from the unemployment insurance fund to help 5.7 million workers to care for their families, and the mass rollout of vaccination campaign that reached over 60% of society, in particular the most vulnerable. That is social compact in action. Over the past year, we have worked with government to prioritize and expedite key progressive legislations and to ensure that Parliament will be able to pass them into law as the 6th administration wrap up its work. Last Friday, we witnessed and welcomed the coming into effect of the Compensation of Occupational Injuries and Diseases Amendment Act, extending to cover over 900,000 domestic workers and increasing protection for all workers, as well as the Employment Equity Amendment Act, requiring companies doing business with the state to be in compliance with the Employment Equity and the National Minimum Wage Act. Key bills we look to see enacted includes the following: the National Health Insurance Bill, ensuring quality and affordable health care for all; Expropriation Bill, empowering the state to expedite land reform; Mine Health and Safety Amendment Bill, further protecting mine workers; the Public Procurement Bill, establishing a single transparent public procurement system for the entire state, boosting local procurement and tackling corruption; Companies Amendment Bill, requiring the disclosure of the wage gap between the highest and the lowest paid workers as we push to narrow the wage gap; and the Employment Services Amendment Bill, regulating migrant workers' employment. The triple challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality continues to ravage the working class and the poor in our country. There is no doubt that the socio-economic material conditions of the working class in South Africa are deteriorating rapidly post the democratic breakthrough. The successive adoption of neoliberal, orthodox, pro-capital, anti-working class macroeconomic policies anchored around austerity, monetary and fiscal policies continue to impact negatively on the socio-economic status of the working class and the poor. The recent directive by National Treasury to effect cost containment measures is not helping as well, as the country struggles with an economy that is not growing and also leading to freezing of hiring of new employees in the public service. This will also have an impact on the performance of major instruments at the disposal of workers to defend themselves, such as Nedlac, CCMA, and the Labour Court. The unfortunate loss of a life arising out of the incident of the hijacked building is yet another low point in our democratic society. The call by the Freedom Charter that there shall be houses, security and comfort cannot wait any longer to be implemented in the interest of the working class and the poor. The economy will not grow by some miracles with a business as usual approach, nor will it rebound with an approach that chokes the state of the resources it needs to provide quality public service that business, workers and communities depend on. As we enter the final stretch of this administration, we must accelerate our interventions to turn South Africa around. Workers cannot afford complacency. We must, in the medium-term budget policy statement and the February budget, allocate additional resources and support to ESCOM to reduce and end load shedding. We must undertake an urgent intervention to secure and rebuild Transnet and PRASA. We must overhaul collapsing municipalities and embattled state-owned enterprises. We must provide more resources to the South African Police Service to tackle tax evasion, the SARS in particular, to tackle tax evasion and conduct lifestyles audit, as well as the South African Police Service, the NPA and courts to combat crime and corruption. We must extend the presidential employment program to accommodate 1 million active participants by October and 2 million by February 2024. We must raise the SRD grant to the food poverty line and link its recipients to skills and job opportunities. I think it's a matter which we agree with the community constituency in the main. And we're saying 2024 will be uncharted waters. It is incumbent upon this leadership here to help steer the nation. Some may be tempted to grandstand and offer slogans. Others may prefer to lament. Neither will create a single job or rebuild single public service. It is important we be honest amongst ourselves. Government needs to do better, not to allow bills that have left Nedlac to gather dust for years on the desks of ministers when they should be in parliament. Business needs to ensure that employers embrace their responsibilities under our labor laws and seeks ways to create jobs. Community needs to mobilize residents to protect public infrastructure and pay for services. We as labor must ensure our workplaces comply with our labor laws and expose corruption where we see it. Ours is to offer solutions and collectively work to implement them. The colors of our T-shirts may differ as the working class, but we are collectively united and committed in our struggle to build a South Africa where everyone can enjoy better life. Allow me to conclude by thanking the Executive Director, Lisa, and her team. They continue to do us proud. Lisa in particular have been a breath of fresh air and relentless warrior holding all of us accountable. It is important that we also appreciate the partnership we have developed with our colleagues in government, business and community, and of course within organized labor too, with the admission of SAF too amongst our ranks. We applaud all of your efforts on behalf of workers of South Africa. Lastly, indeed I want to acknowledge how you have welcomed me personally into Nedlac community since I took over as the overall convener of organized labor, and to honor the legacies left by my predecessor, Comrade Begin Challenger. Na kensa shne, engo.
Thank you very much again, and I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Minister of Public Enterprise, Minister Pravin Gordhan, who has joined us. And I would like to thank the Executive Director again of Nedlac, Ms. Lisa Seftel, for the report, and also appreciate the inputs that were coming from the Nedlac constituency leaders, the reflections on what has been done, what is to be done, and how it should be done, defining our vision as a nation, and how we can together execute that vision. And I must say that we have come to the end of the first session, and as I hand over to my next chairperson of the second session, Mr. Nhlanhla Ndlovu, I would like to call upon the choir to do the honor of ushering us off the stage and ushering him to conduct the next session into the stage. If the choir can come and give us the musical item. Thank you very much. You are indeed appreciated. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you.
Good morning. Is the choir coming? Doesn't seem like the choir is coming. I think we should continue then. Colleagues, comrades, friends, can we be in order? Can we just be in order? It does seem like we don't have the choir ready, and because in the interest of time we need to recover some lost time, we shall then proceed. Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Minister Nglesi, Minister Gordon, all deputy ministers present, directors general that are also here, leaders of social partners in business, government, labor and community, ED, Lisa Seftel, the members of the portfolio committee led by the chair, and all the distinguished guests, we greet you. This is the second session and the last session of the summit. And of course, this is the session that responds to the theme of this summit. As you can see, that the theme of the summit is about resilience in the face of adversity, social partners' preparedness for the crisis. In the period from 2020 up until today, Nedlac has had to deal with a number of, or respond to a number of crises. The ED is calling them poly-crises, which I would call them a myriad of crises. We've actually started with the response to COVID and set up a rapid response task team that gave us a model of responding both rapidly, which is basically responding to a crisis as it occurs, but it also enabled us to begin to negotiate long-term responses to our crises, like the energy crisis, the socio-economic crisis, the employment crisis, skills crisis, all the other crises that we're faced with. So our response to crisis is not characterized by the rapid response nature only, but it's also, there's a policy element, there's a planning element to it. Now we have had various responses, like we have had responses to various crises in Nedlac. As I'm saying that we had a rapid response task team on COVID. We have had a cost of living task team that is actually dealing with both food and fuel and other cost of living related issues. We have had response to the riots in KZN in 2021. We have had like a response to the flooding in KZN. We are now dealing with new crises like the collapse of the road in Johannesburg, as well as like the burning of the building in Liliengoy Street. There are various other problems that we are actually faced with as a country. We have got a very good array of experts in their fields that are going to be responding, actually like talking about various responses to crises. And it's unfortunate because the crisis occurred elsewhere and it's upon us now to solve it. We are behind time. So I'm just going to request that the panel tries as much as possible to keep it within the 10 minutes allocated, because we are trying to recover the time. Now, I'm not going to go through every profile of the panelists. The QR code will take you into the profiles of all the speakers, including this current panel, but even the previous speakers in the program. So I'll request that you go to the QR code. What I'm just going to do quickly is to introduce the panel so that I don't come back. What I will be doing after this is just to manage time. In our panel, we have got Ms. Vivienne Pearson, who will give an input on the situation facing South Africa. She will be categorizing the list and kind of crisis situations that we may face in South Africa and what is the likelihood of crisis and what could be the impact. We'll also have Dr. Shafiq Adams, whose input will focus on the international experiences of responding to induced crisis situations. We'll have Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. We'll have Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman. He will be giving an input on building resilience and responding to crisis situations at the community level. He will also share lessons from the experience of responding to crisis situation in South Africa and what can be done to prevent and prepare crisis type situation. Mr. Dr. Suleiman will be joining us on virtually. We'll then have Mr. Mxolisi Mgojo, who will give us an input on the experience of the National Logistic Crisis Committee in collaborating to address security-related crises on freight rail. We'll then have Mr. Duncan Luvuno, who will give an input on the experience of organized labor in responding to mine occupational health and safety crises. We will then have Ms. Furumele, who will also have a virtual input that will address the experience of the Department of Health in responding to the recent cholera crisis. And finally, we will have Mr. Martin Kingston, whose input will focus on social partners' joint response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lessons for socio-economic crisis and crisis-type situations. As I said, I'm introducing everybody, and you can go to the list in the QR code. What I'm then going to do from now on, I'm just going to stand up and only call for the speakers so that we try to recover the time. As according to the program, the first of our speakers is going to be Ms. Pearson. Yes, Ms. Pearson, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning, everybody. I'm just setting my stopwatch because 10 minutes is very short. If I can. Now, okay, thank you very much. I would like to recognize all the honorable delegates and speakers, including the Deputy President and the ministers, and the Deputy Ministers, the leaders of organized business, organized community, organized labor, and also the Executive Director and the team from Nedlac. And in addition, everybody else who is in the room, all of us are important to acknowledge. Thank you very much. So, Chairperson, I have a problem. I've been given a very, very strict brief. Just list all the crises and give them a likelihood or whatever, and I must say that will be a subjective one, according to what I think it is. But all those crises have now been listed already by all the other speakers. So I'm going to do that still, because it's setting the scene for the rest of the speakers who are tasked to elaborate a little bit more in depth on particular crises. Firstly, I'm going to tell you why I was invited to do the setting of the scene. So I am the CEO of the South African Insurance Association. We represent the non-life insurance industry. And of course, the non-life insurance industry gets all the claims when crises happen. So it impacts directly on the sustainability and the affordability of insurance, and that then further impact on the protection gap. So how many people can afford insurance if the risks come so high, and the price goes up, and these events are not unexpected anymore. It is a problem, and we need to find solutions. Now, I don't want to just be doom and gloom. These crises are major. They're critical to fix. We can fix them. At the South African Insurance Association, we have a lot of ideas about solutions on many of these, but it needs a partnership. And I think that it is the key of today, and very, very appropriate. So I'm going to now just list these risks, and I'm sure I'm not telling anybody anything new, but maybe the point made by the polycrisis, about the polycrisis situation. I think that any one of these risks individually would already be a major ask in terms of turning it around. I'm sorry, Professor, I'm reverting to risk. It's just a habit of the insurance people. We're talking about crises. There are solutions. These will have to be shared resilience solutions. So maybe business and government, where required other partners, where required all of us together. We need to put our hands up, all of us. The first one is the pandemic risk, or pandemic potential recurring events, and then other health-related risks, whether it's localized or regional, and we see this happening as we speak. Pandemics, I believe the likelihood is high. We know that this is not the end of COVID. We know that there are going to come other diseases, and the world has become very small. So I think the likelihood is high, and clearly we have experienced the impact will be big. The electricity crisis, we cannot emphasize that enough. Load shedding, obviously it is there, so the likelihood is it's happening. And the impact is huge, and that impacts everything else. It impacts unemployment, it impacts growth, and more. It impacts people's positiveness, which is very, very bad. The lack of infrastructure maintenance, especially critical infrastructure, everybody has mentioned that is a critical issue to address. I have a few new ones here, which really impacts heavily and should be fixed, to preserve property, to allow businesses to rebuild, to talk to the insurability of property, to also address the affordability of insurance. which creates an access to finance. If you can't insure something, you can't get a loan. So it is crucial that we address these things. The new ones not mentioned yet, apart from electricity, water infrastructure, ports, rails and roads, the firefighting services in South Africa. The state of the firefighting services in South Africa for various reasons. Budget not used for the right things. The equipment, the training, the management. And then that speaks directly to the road, to the water infrastructure. So, there's not enough pressure in the water, in the water pipes. So the fire engine can be there, but nothing's going to happen. So what we are seeing is total losses if there's a fire. There are some municipalities, a handful, but most of them are not really performing well. And that's where we need to take hands with government to address it. So the likelihood of the lack of infrastructure and its impact is obviously high, and the impact is huge. Increased climate change related events, it's inedible, it's here, it's huge. A social and or political risk, I think I would like to just mention that this is sometimes underestimated. We have an unequal and an exclusive society in South Africa, and we know that. We have a lot of unemployment, we have a lot of poverty. There are geopolitical tensions, there are political tensions. Even the geopolitical tensions or the war between Russia and the Ukraine impact on supply chains, impact on the cost of goods. It impacts on a lot of things. It even impacts us. So I think that it, and then we're talking about the education, an economy that's not growing, and no investment or not much investment. Because of all these crises that we are facing and the way that we are probably not yet dealing with them properly. These things speak to each other, they impact each other, and they increase the risk of people being unhappy and protesting. And if you sort of link that with a lack of infrastructure and maybe the impact on service delivery, that really allows for an opportunity to explode, to release the stresses, to release the unhappiness, and I think that it is important to recognize that risk. I think we are increasingly, in terms of likelihood, we need to be more worried about earthquakes. And again, whether it's natural or a result of man-made stuff like the mining and so on. I live on the West Rand. We've had 2 incidents in the last 2 or 3 months, earthquakes. And of course, there's a lot of empty, mine shafts underneath there. And then we know what's happened in Johannesburg, in the city centre. But I do want to say that I didn't list these things in order of importance. I think all of them are important. The last one I listed clearly crime and criminality, and then including corruption, and it talks to a wide range from organized crime to petty crime to crime because you're poor to gender-based violence to and it speaks also to the moral fabric of our country, which is something that underlies all of these things. I think that crime and criminality is obviously it's happening, the likelihood is high, but the impact is devastating and it is pervasive. Crime and criminality is part and parcel of every one of these crises that we fight. The energy crisis, the infrastructure issues. It is part of every one of these things. And I think that the next point that I want to make is that we should not see these risks in isolation. And I'm now talking something, different than it is all coming at the same time and it's ongoing and therefore it's a polycrisis. I agree absolutely with that. And it makes it more difficult to deal with all of them. But these risks are all interactive. So I'm going to give an example or two. So I've already mentioned crime and corruption that's part of most of these risks. The lack of proper infrastructure, for example, will make a weather-related event like a flood, much worse. Thank you, Chair. In turn, the weather event, a flood, a hurricane, or whatever, will impact on the infrastructure. So it's also the way in which these crises interlink that makes them worse. I firmly believe that we all know what we're facing. We need to face it head on. I am sure that many of us know how to fix these things. And I would like to emphasize that I think the time for talking is over. Unless we talk with a focus on implementation. I don't think that a blame game is going to, give us any progress. I think the time is now, the time to act, the time to implement, and the time to take hands and to do it together where it makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. I will call Ms. Dr. Flick.
Can you load my presentation, please? And while they do that, maybe just in your mind, just think about the top 2 crises in the country at the moment. Is my presentation been loaded? Thank you. And if theft and vandalism is not in your top 2, then you need to catch a cat, wake up. Because where we work, this is what we see. Whatever resilience we put in place, whatever infrastructure, that is becoming a serious crisis. So I'm going to talk about some of the international experiences. My storyline is around, I'll set the scene locally. How do we need to shift that paradigm? And I'm going to use the framing lens. We've heard about risk. We're going to look at some of the community responses and some of the solutions. And something, you'll notice something very quickly. Okay? So disasters and climate change and sustainable development are linked. One issue that cuts across all 3 is extreme events. So if you put on your TV on the news in the last 2 weeks, and when they had the weather component on it, it's always a typhoon, a hurricane, a storm surge, a wildfire, etc. And societies are not well adapted to extreme weather that we're experiencing today, because when they say these things, they say it's the biggest in 100 years. We are currently experiencing the warmest summer on record. So heat is a problem, because heat is energy, and that energy drives the global system. And these are some of the issues, and these are the results that we commonly see and often experience as well. But again, if you just look at the graph, and this is some of the work that we've been doing at the Water Research Commission for some time. If you look at the top cartoon, you'll see blue going into brown. So blue means it was a wetter period going into a drier period. And if you go from the top to the bottom, you go from summer to spring with autumn and winter in the middle. And you can see somewhere in the 70s, we've moved out of a wet period into a very drier period. So we've been in climate change for 50 years. It's not something that's going to happen. I often hear that climate change is going to do that. We've been experiencing, but what's happening at the moment is that we see that it almost had that predictability. So it had, usually when we were at school, we were taught about return periods. But now that return period has kind of been wiped off, and what you often now hear is that the whole season's rainfall arrived in 1 day or 2 days. This is the eThekwini story. And what's the result of that? The result of that is our infrastructure was never designed for all that water to, so it's usually sized over a season for 3 months. So say, for example, my rainfall is 500 millimeters, so it splits, and when we design our infrastructure, it's over 3 months, the season. But it was never designed for it to arrive in 24 or 48 hours. And at the bottom is the one that should worry you, and it should be, if you're a decision maker, it should be imprinted in your mind. So as we march towards the end of the century, 2100, what we see that Southern Africa is becoming more and more drier. And all those okay, and this is on average, of course. But you'll also see there's a lot of noise in the graphs, and these are the extreme events where we swing from high intense precipitations to very dry seasons, and we go up and down like this. And of course, we've experienced this already. The other problem in terms of a localized context is that the climate literacy, and so on the map, you want dark green. So if the green is too light to you, it means that the climate literacy, and this was from an Afrobarometer survey, it means that the climate literacy is fairly low. So it's from 1 to 20, etc. So even if there's an error of 20 or 30%, it brings you to 50%. But for an area that's going to experience some of these issues, it is a big problem. And then, of course, we want to shift this paradigm. So again, in the international context, I watch a lot of TV, I read a lot of things. The one that's dominant is a top-down kind of interaction. Government to society is then treated as an interested and effective party. But what we want to shift towards or create that balance is where community, and so when we start talking about social compacting, how do we use communities that has that local expertise, that has that local interest, and bring that in that social learning? How do they experience the drought? How do they manage through that drought? How do they improve their thing? And I'll show some examples of that. Okay? So you want to go from a responsive to a reactive and proactive thing. This thing is not moving. Okay? And again, the lens that we want to use is to use this risk equals hazard times vulnerability divided by resilience. Okay? So, and if you look at the world map, the stuff or the points that's in red, so this methodology takes all events, runs it through a methodology, and then says these are categorized as natural and these are man-made. And again, you can see for a decade or so, it is just red in terms of some of these events. And of course, we've heard about polycrisis, but we also have multi-hazards that kind of fluctuate between drought, storms, floods, fires, etc. And these have all been in the news in the last week, etc. And so the hazard is there. We know it. We know it's coming, and we're experiencing. Vulnerability is how do we plan, and then how vulnerable things is, because you can have the hazard, but if there's no vulnerability, it is just a storm somewhere, and that's why we don't hear of it. But if you have destruction of infrastructure, lives, etc., it means they were vulnerable to the hazard, and again, the resilience. And what we want to do is we want to reduce the vulnerability and up the resilience. It's moving. Okay, so what, and that's just what I said. So as I said, if the hazard is realized, you have high vulnerability, you have a disaster. Okay? But what we know is that in a crisis, neighborhoods are almost always the first responders. But when you watch your TV on all these international events, you have the chief or whoever or the mayor, and he's surrounded with people with all these badges. But what you do not see in these interactions is the community members. They are always treated as that interested in affected party or that victim. And I think that part of the lesson is how do we change that. Okay? So internationally also there are kind of two schools. You have community responses that's supported by government. And then you also have community-led responses. So communities take the charge, government supports. And I think you probably need a hybrid based on the context at any particular period. Yeah, minute is high. Okay. And again, so what we want to do, and again, you can just read, for example, how do we improve adaptation, co-designing with engineers. So you use communities to co-design climate-smart infrastructure. So you build back smarter using local knowledge. You don't do like a certain metro that had a huge flood, go and replace as if the same event is not going to happen. We know it's going to come again. And the silliness of that just boggles the mind. And then how do we increase resilience to absorb some of these things? And this is just some of these things. And of course, Dr. Suleiman will expand on some of these. And here's just a very good example. So when people say there's no social compact, etc., here's an example. Social compact is not a thing, it's not a goal, it is the process. It changes always within context, scale, etc. So here's a project that we did at the Water Research Commission where we took local knowledge, we optimized that indigenous or local knowledge with scientists and engineers, and we've increased resilience, world-beating. And again, I'm circling back that we don't need international best practice. We are doing it world, and we're winning things. Citizen science is another very good example where we use citizens to build that learning, to build that understanding, to also to complement our monitoring. Because one thing that we've done in the world, and in South Africa in particular, is that we've now covered the fuel gauge in our car by underfunding and cutting budgets in our data and monitoring. We are not interested how full the tank is. But because we have these crises, we need to actually, we have more data stations, etc. And again, citizen science is the way to go. So you build capacity, you bring in people, etc. And again, South Africa is a world leader in this domain. But again, it's about scaling and integration. This is our problem. We do not integrate enough. And again, how do you use the scientific community, government communities? And we have some good examples, but we need to get this better rather than it's just government or it's just communities or it's just the science. It's how do we create that mechanism that we are doing. So it requires a systems approach for a complex system issue. And again, how do we do that? The business as usual at the moment, very uncoordinated. Impact is but we want to get to that transformational space where we connect and coordinate. And that is my story for today.
I'm very sorry, Dr. Adams. We have Dr. Suleiman online, and he has to actually go for a prayer at 12. So we're actually like requesting that we go quickly there. We're gonna basically be cutting him short from the 10 minutes he was allocated. He's cutting himself short because he has to be leaving at 12. So I hope we are ready to link up with Dr. Suleiman. Are we? Okay. Okay, over to you, Dr. Suleiman.
I have a few minutes after 12 o'clock, so it's fine. Thank you to Shafiq for cutting his program short. But I'm not sure who's in the room, but I think the Deputy President is there, ministers are there, Deputy Ministers are there, President of COSATU is there, and everybody else. Sorry, I don't know who's in the room, but greetings to all of you all, and greetings to the NIPAT committee. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity just to share a few minutes with you on disaster intervention. I want to break it up into two or three aspects. One is, the system of disaster intervention, the mechanism and the network that we have is critical. I'll bring in some practical examples, the KZN floods, Cyclone Idai, and just some general comments. Number one, our structure in terms of disasters in responding to South Africa has to be changed. We don't have a single system of command, and that's been a big crisis every time we've had a major disaster. We've got too many departments involved, but we've got no leader. And the problem is when you have too many departments involved and you have too many people, there's too many egos involved. And the other problem is nobody wants to take responsibility. So in the KZN floods, who's in charge? Is it national disaster, provincial disaster, national Kochta, provincial Kochta, municipality disaster management, the K9, the SNDF, human settlements? Who's involved? And you could see a crisis because nobody would take responsibility. So that's the first thing we need to fix. And I've discussed this with some ministers already, that we need a clear chain of command. One guy at the top presses the button and everybody down the line follows the instructions. We can't be having a system where the province is looking for search and rescue workers to come from other provinces and nobody can make the decision. If we have one centralized command and say, okay, we've been in trouble in KZN, we need additional people, we need to deploy 9 provinces, we need you guys there straight away. So we need a very, very clear system. More than anything else, we need to organize the system of response, the hierarchy, the mechanism, the release mechanism, who goes, who does what, who's in charge. You know, and there should be somebody appointed to do that urgently because egos will destroy the system and we have lack of effective intervention. And when that happens, people die. The more effective you are, the more lives you save. So there's the first element. The structure is absolutely critical in disaster response, especially the type of disasters that we've been getting recently. The 2019 floods, the 2022, that was in Durban in association with Cyclone Idai, and now in 2022, 11th April, the massive floods that hit us along the coast. That's the first thing we need to put right. Secondly, another major crisis during the KZN floods was the lack of sniffer dogs. And a lot of bodies have still not been found. People haven't had closure because we couldn't find the bodies. The dogs we have are too old. To deal with that problem, we approached the SAPS and we've offered them 60 dogs to be used not only for search and rescue, but also in crime fighting. And the first batch of those dogs will be leaving for Pretoria very soon from Cape Town. Of course, as an aside, not related to the disaster discussion, in the last week or so, we've been talking about securing our borders and making it more effective. In the standard line, I'm offering to the government and to the security services another 50 dogs with immediate effect to be given to the government for free, to be used for patrolling on the borders if you want, and I can make it available immediately from Monday onwards. That's aside from the 60 personnel, the 60 dogs that we're giving for search and rescue and other crime fighting for the police. The third element, of course, is our personnel. Do we have enough personnel? Now, in the KZN crisis, even though you may have centralized structures in Durban, you couldn't get to the right areas because the roads were cut off. Helicopters couldn't fly because the rain was too strong and the wind was too strong. We need, as part of our training, because this is going to keep happening over and over again. We can see the pattern. We're going to keep having this kind of challenges all the time, and we need to be more ready. We need to take retired police people, police reservists, firefighters, search and rescue personnel along the coast and in other parts of the country to train them and have a mechanism of training every 3 to 6 months where they are kept fit and ready to respond. A huge benefit or a huge success in the KZN floods in 2022 was the citizen response. We had people who are not trained disaster response people, who are not divers, who don't do anything in terms of search and rescue. But many lives were saved because of very ordinary people. In Tonga, at 5:30 in the afternoon, on 11th April 2022, the water rose 8 meters in 45 minutes. And had the local people not responded, an entire community would have been washed away. Fortunately, it was daytime, people were on the top floor of the houses and saw the water rise very quickly. And within minutes, ordinary people came with boats, came with whatever, and they evacuated the entire area to high-level areas. And whilst talking about evacuation and moving people, all credit goes to the real heroes in our disaster, the ordinary people. They arranged blankets, mattresses, food, whatever they could bring, 1 pot, half a pot, 1 chicken, but they did it. They did it for several fellow South Africans. We are a nation of resilient people who stand for each other, who help each other. But we need the system to be properly in place, what I spoke about initially. The government needs to organize a South African system of response. And of course, we have the trained personnel in the different areas. We have better command systems where people will fall in line with a trained search and rescue person or a firefighter or a police reservist, and there'll be discipline and obedience. The other thing is we don't have enough helicopters, and we don't have enough functioning helicopters, and we don't have enough boats. Again, when the crisis hits the entire coastline, and you have to deploy boats from the central area in Durban, and the roads are cut off, and the water it's too rough, you can't get there. We need to position boats along the whole coast, and again, other areas where this kind of weather patterns causes major disaster. The fourth issue is communications. You cannot rely on cell phones. In a disaster like this, the power cables, the power stations get knocked out first. The cell phone towers are knocked out, and people couldn't communicate for hours. We, in Gift of the Givers, we have our own two-way radio system, which in Mozambique, at one stage at the beginning of Cyclone Nedlac, we were the only guys that could communicate from Beira, West Equina, and other parts across the water, because we had that kind of communication systems. And we've got partners that deal with that kind of communication networks. We need to implement and invest in two-way radio systems. They don't fail you. They have repeaters, and you can do it every so many kilometers where people can communicate with each other. Now, if you have that system of training of police reservists and people, retired people, they will be able to manage that system. The other challenge that you have is that inevitably there are no reserves. There are no mattresses, no blankets, no system of rapid response for hot meals, bottled water. We've got no warehouses anywhere in the country to do that. And when I say we, I mean government. And that's something government has to look at very carefully. And I've mentioned this several times to several ministers and several people in disaster management. The tragedy is that disaster management calls Gift of the Givers. In every case, we are called to respond, to assist Gift of the Givers. For Gift of the Givers to assist the disaster management. Even in firefighting, in many instances, there were not enough firefighters. We arranged to pay to bring additional personnel in. There was never enough water or energy biscuits or food for firefighters. In several fires, we did that, even in the one in Johannesburg last week. We did it in Knysna with the UCT fires, with the fires in Gallagher in November, December last year. Let's take that one, and I can finish off here with my 10 minutes are up, just to use a classical example of how we are not ready. The fire hits parts of Gallagher. To the credit of the acting fire chief, Wayne Hendricks, from the area, no ego, understood to save the city, he needs help. He calls us, he tells us 4 or 5 critical pieces of information. My trucks cannot reach the fire, number 1. The wind is very strong, so the fire is spreading, but his trucks can't reach the fire. My trucks can't get to a water point fast enough. Number 3, we're almost on day 0, so we don't have water. Number 4, we don't have enough firefighters. Number 5, we cannot replenish our firefighters with food, with energy biscuits, with drink. We got a problem. There is no funding. National government doesn't step in. Provincial government doesn't step in. The municipality is left alone, it doesn't step in. And the firefighters are left alone. There's a critical flaw in the system in which we operate. And the politics got a big role to play with us. We look at cities and say, okay, which party is controlling the city? We need to change that thinking. Those parties may collect, but the citizens are all South African. And we need to look at South African citizens as South African citizens, not which party they belong to. We have to change our thinking and have massive mindset change. Without exaggeration, had we not intervened, Gallagher would have been burnt to the ground. Ask anybody that they will tell you. Immediately when he said that he can't reach the fire, we sent in 2 helicopters and 2 planes at our cost. We paid people to be additional firefighters. We brought them from down the road from Johannesburg and Jeffreys Bay area to come and assist. We brought in trucks to support the fire trucks. We have drilled 50 boreholes in PE because of day 0. We opened those boreholes to supply our trucks and the fire trucks. And the local citizens got involved. They came with their buckets. They came with Jojo tanks on their buckets. We filled that. And with their help, we fought the fire over 5 days. In fact, and also to feed the firefighters, We gave them bottled water, energy drinks, energy food, hot meals in those days that they really fought well. South African disaster personnel are world class. They are dedicated, they're committed, they're part of government, and they're committed people. But we need to make the resources available to support them, to do their job properly. The final point, as we were walking through the malls, people came, touched us, and was sobbing. And they said our house was about to burn, the mall was about to burn, other areas were about to burn, and your helicopters and your planes came and dropped the water from the sky and bombed the fire out. So these are practical examples. It's not rocket science. We need a better system, and I want to make a proposal or a request to government. Park off 1 billion rand in a fund controlled by Treasury, the returns of which can be used for disaster intervention, because the reality is, since the tsunami of 2004, the number of disasters are increasing, and the frequency and intensity and the degree of destruction is increasing. So we need to consider those proposals. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much for talking to you, and we can always share ideas at some other point. And I wish you all the best in this conference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suleiman. We apologize for delaying your speaking time, but we appreciate the input. There are other speakers that are still going to come in our panel. Now we call upon Mr. Mkolisi Mgojo to speak. Mr. Mgojo.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think just to save some time, given the fact that I'm already looking at a 1-minute papers waiting for me here, I would really like to get to the chase, as they say. So all protocol observed. Thank you very much. I was asked to provide input on the experiences of the National Logistics Crisis Committee in collaborating to address security-related crises on freight rail. As you can all appreciate, transport and logistics is one of the very critical 3 focal areas that government, in collaboration also with business and others, are busy trying to address. Just by way of background, for those who may not know, the NLCC, as we call it, came into being after months of hard work and personal intervention by the President in April and May 2023 in direct response to the crisis in transport and logistics. It is positioned as one of the 3 crisis committees, in addition to the NECOM, which is the National Energy Crisis Committee, and also the Joint Initiative to Fight Crime and Corruption, which is, we acronym it as JIC. And it is receiving the highest government attention, whereby every 6 weeks, when we have to report back to the President and Cabinet, and we are expected to demonstrate progress at these sessions. Bold and decisive action is needed to address this logistics crisis within the next 12 months in order to prevent further damage to our economy. Rather than disparate interventions across government and business, as we did with COVID, a coordinated approach is needed to enable a coherent, integrated response that creates an enabling environment for Transnet and other stakeholders to effectively turn around the performance of our country's logistics system. As indicated, the NLCC is chaired by the President and includes the relevant members of Cabinet and other Transnet senior leadership. It will oversee implementation of the Freight Logistics Roadmap, a plan to reform that has been developed by Operation Vulindlela, which is currently being socialized throughout the various stakeholders, and which will focus on 3 main objectives: to improve operational performance of freight, rail, and ports, to restructure Transnet to ensure its future sustainability, and to implement reforms to modernize the freight transport system and restore its efficiency and competitiveness in the long term. A distinction will be made between short, medium, and long-term actions to to achieve these objectives, recognizing the need for interventions to address the immediate crisis and increase volumes transported on the network, as well as long-term measures to ensure future competitiveness and resilience. The following principles will guide the work of the NLCC: urgency and focus on addressing the immediate crisis, and the matter of security of South Africa infrastructure is one of the most immediate and urgent areas that must be addressed. A business unusual approach is going to be required to ensure that we remove regulatory bottlenecks and red tape to create a more flexible regulatory environment that responds to the crisis. A more open and robust engagement is going to be also required to resolve areas of disagreement, assuming good faith on part of all those are involved. Strong political coordination by delegated ministers and a clear timeframes, implementation modalities, transparency, and accountability. The NLCC's first order of business was to develop work streams where government and business could engage meaningfully around key focus areas that require urgency. The terms of reference were collaborated, agreed, settling on 8 work streams that have been defined. Originally, since we are dealing with issues of security, security was listed as one of the areas to address in work stream 1, which deals with stabilizing and improving the country's rail system. However, before we could even begin that work, there was an agreement to specifically address security within its own work stream. Crime and corruption is a many-headed monster with deeply embedded roots, and therefore a strong, collaborative, and multi-pronged response is needed if we are going to be successful, and I am confident that we will see levels of collaboration not seen before in our determination to rid South Africa of the scourge. Security is now work stream 7 and will focus on securing railway, port, pipeline infrastructure, as well as addressing cable theft, vandalism on container corridor, and the coal line and other strategic rail corridors. A close link will be established between this work stream and the Joint Initiative on Crime and Corruption, which is quickly finding its feet as the entity intended to mobilize a collaborative effort against crime and corruption. Additionally, the security workstream will ensure security in the road transport sector is urgently addressed, specifically around driver, cargo, and vehicle safety. The workstream is chaired by Lieutenant General Peter Jacobs, who is also responsible for the ESCOM security workstream under NICOM. So lessons learned are immediately brought across to transport and logistics, a prime example of benefit and power of collaboration. NLCC security workstreams includes representatives from NetJoints, Transnet, the State Security Agency, rail and port users, pipeline users, the road freight sector, and local municipalities, a further level of collaboration at work. Addressing security locally at municipal level and with support of communities will be a critical aspect of any solution. It is vital that the road transport sector is involved, sharing information, experiences, and solutions, as there is a relationship between road and rail. It is also important to address concerns that road transport benefits when rail fails, and these matters are being openly addressed in the workstream. As far as rail and port are concerned, all 6 key rail and port corridors, namely coal, iron ore, manganese, chrome, containers, and ArcelorMittal, have been brought together to share experiences and solutions before the NetJoins team, and we have been encouraged by the level of transparency and frankness on the challenges and proposed responses. As some of you may be aware, rail port users on the coal line, the iron ore line, and ArcelorMittal line have already, with full collaboration and support of TFR, been providing various levels of private security interventions on these corridors. This has without doubt been successful and has led to a significant reduction in security incidences and cancelled trains on these lines in particular. 3 further collaborative efforts are also being addressed by the security workstream with NLCC. A multidisciplinary pilot intervention involving communities, Transnet employees, SABC, SASA, private security, and TFR appointed service providers. This approach requires collaboration and tight planning, but also indications are that it has great chances of success. As mentioned earlier, crime is a many-headed monster, and specifically copper cable theft is causing significant disruption in 3 areas of the economy. A collaborative approach and effort between security executives in all of these areas is underway, where trends, analysis, data, information, and intelligence are being used to plan coordinated responses. Finally, the collaboration between security initiatives in NICOM, mainly ESCOM, and NLCC, under mainly Transnet, and the great work being done by the JIC, though it is early days, is invaluable. JIC representatives attend the NICOM and NLC security workstreams meetings, will be further integrating their strategies with these efforts. I do realize that we're still receiving bad news every day around crime and corruption. But be assured from what you have heard this morning, and I'm sure the further deliberations that are going to happen also within Nedlac, given the crisis that has been identified around security, that we will get rid of this scourge in our country. Collaboratively, we will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkojo. Mr. Mkojo has actually indicated that he is going to be leaving quickly before even the panel finishes. He's got a flight that he will be catching, so he will be excused. Next. Yeah, am I audible? Next to speak is going to be Mr. Duncan Luvuno. Over to you, Mr. Luvuno.
Let me firstly greet His Excellency, Deputy President Paul Mashatile, the ministers present, DGs, comrades and friends. Yes, let me assure you, Program Director, that you won't have to bring the paper here. I made sure that I have the 25 presentation is on the website, so colleagues and friends will find it there. So I'll be very short, Program Director. Can you flag this presentation? Maybe I'm standing here. Maybe I think it's very important that one says why one has been tasked with this input. Not because I'm a second president of COSATU, but on my other capacity, I'm a national chair of health and safety in the National Union of Mine Workers. So I deal with this particular space, comrades. Okay, let me just put it here. I won't be able to give a thorough background. Ordinarily, I would have loved to do that. However, I just want us just to see where do we come from with this crisis of occupational health and safety in the mines. Previously, we used to have a lot of deaths in the mines. We had a number of disasters, just a few. We had the Colebrook disaster, whereby there was a rock burst underground, and 434 people perished. We have a Shobane disaster, where 64 people perished due to methane underground. We had a Kinross disaster, where 177 perished due to the gas explosion. We had Val Reefs disaster, where 104 workers perished. So I think it's very important that we keep that in mind when we are continuing to do our presentation. In 1996, we were able just to cap these fatalities in the mining sector to put a law of Mine Health and Safety Act, which, among other things, it gave a provision for workers to be able to refuse unsafe work, which is Section 23 of the Mine Health and Safety Act. It further gave a provision to the chief inspector and inspectors to be able to stop jobs, to stop mines, to even close mines, temporarily or permanently. So where we are now, in the last financial year, or in 2022, we had in totality 49 fatalities in the mine. It means, in simpler terms, 49 breadwinners perished in the mining sector. As we speak now, in this financial year, we are at 33 fatalities. The intervention that has been put to the fore, among others, are teams that have been brought by the Mine Health and Safety Council, which reports directly to the Department of Minerals and Energy, whereby we are having tripartite forums. The tripartite forums, they consist of the DMRE, which is government. They consist of organized labor. They also consist of the employers, which is business, whereby we regularly meet to discuss or to take stock on the focus areas to cap these fatalities. Not so fast. I almost finished, So basically, the problem that we're having, or the disaster that we're having currently, is the fall of grounds, which in the previous financial year we only had 6 fall of grounds, which is predominantly dominating or making a huge number, a huge chunk in the overall fatalities that we are having in the mining sector. The fall of ground, among other issues, what causes it is that our mines, they are now mining the pillars. The pillars are supports. The pillars are supports that are meant to support the mines, because they are rich deposits. As you mine and mine and mine, you leave a lot of pillars. But now they are mining the pillars. In this financial year, as we speak, we are having close to 9 fatalities, which predominantly are caused by the fall of ground, which is this mining of pillars, and so on and so forth. I think another intervention that has been made to cap this fall of grounds, there is a new technology that has been introduced gradually in the mining sector that deals with checking the seismicity in the mines. So we are able to, before time, to see that is the right time to take out workers out of the outside in the underground. Another thing, we're having a focus area in the tripartite that I've referred to, whereby mining bosses, labor, as well as the MRE, we do visible felt leadership. We go to the mines as a collective and go underground in all these provinces to check and also to listen to the people that are doing they're at the coal face of this mining work, which is laborers. And another thing that we have done is to also cascade these structures of RTFs, these regional tripartite forums, in all the regions as well, whereby people down from the branches, they are partaking and participating in these forums, so that we can come with a solution. However, as I promised you, Program Director, that my presentation is there, which is very lengthy and very comprehensive. Let me leave it here. But however, I think we have a sentiment as a labor that we need to work together. This thing, it needs a multifaceted approach to solve these programs. Because we're also having now the issue of Zamazamas, of which we need the Minister of Police to also work with us. Because what is happening, you'll find a situation whereby underground, there will be even Zamazamas where our people or where our members are working. So it's very dangerous. There are fatalities which the minds cannot tell how did this particular person die underground. We have those cases as well. So we're saying that it is a very interesting presentation that is there on the website. Let's go, colleagues and comrades, and just go through it. Let me avoid a paper of 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and yes, you kept it less than 10 minutes as we had promised. Our next speaker is supposed to be online. I don't know if we already... Do we have... Can I get an indication?
Thank you, Program Director. I'm already on board. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Thank you very much.
Please do.
Thank you very much. Let me first acknowledge His Excellency Deputy President Paul Mashatile, our honorable ministers, deputy ministers, and all protocol observed. I am going to be talking about building resilience to mitigate impact of public health events, and I'll be using cholera as one of the examples of my presentation. This is just an overview of my presentation, and I'll first talk about the issue of international health regulations, maybe for the benefits of those who haven't heard about the international health regulations, which is our cornerstone for guiding our response to public health events. It is a legally binding global health security framework whose purpose and scope are to prevent, protect against, control and provide a public health response to the international spread of disease in ways that are commensurate with and restricted to public health risk and which avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade. I think we had the experience with COVID-19. The international health regulations was in play when we organized the FIFA 2010 World Cup. We couldn't stop people from coming into the country, but we're supposed to have our core capacities developed. As stated in our second bullet, that South Africa is also signatory to the regulations and is expected to develop core capacities to prepare, detect and respond to public health events. We're coordinating it as a structure which is usually called the International Health Regulations. And let me go back, sorry about that, it moved very fast. We coordinate our response using my slides are just scrambled, I don't know why. But let me go to this presentation where we're talking about our structure that coordinates our response to public health events. It is called the National Focal Point. And we are having people who are having technical issues on prevention, the detection, the response, as well as other related hazards of a technical nature, which is our ports of entries. We have chemical events, we have radiation, and from the top there you'll see we have issues of national legislation, we have issues of workforce development. It's a wide range, and of which some of them are beyond the mandate of the Department of Health. When you're talking of cholera, it's a diarrheal disease that is causing diarrhea, and we have the symptoms where we can see that it's due to diarrhea, but it is associated with poor water, sanitation and hygiene infrastructures. Going forward, just to share with you, this is a picture of what you call the rice watery stool, It's just very, very profuse diarrhea that patients experience, and in the process they lose a lot of electrolytes, which can lead to cardiac arrest and they may demise. We then are going to look into how it happens during the current cholera that we are at the end of. Most people that are at risk of contracting cholera are those who do not have access to piped safe water and improved sanitation, or water that is contaminated with human feces, but water that is also stored can also be contaminated at the source or during storage or during use. We also can see food can become contaminated, fish or even soiled hands can cause that problem of transmission. From the recent cholera that we have, by the 31st of July, we had a total of 1,380 cholera cases, of which we had 52% females, and 199 of those cases had been confirmed, with a resulting 320 admissions. Unfortunately, we lost 47 individuals to the outbreak. This is just to give a pictorial depiction of what happened, and these are the number of cases starting in February, but then I think we had a peak around June, and currently we are standing at the point where since June, it's now almost 6 weeks that we haven't seen a case of cholera in the hospitals. But we also are talking about components of health preparedness and resilience for emerging threats as advised by the World Health Organization. This has now been divided into 4 major ones, which is coordination. We're also talking about collaborative surveillance. We have community protection, clinical care, and access to countermeasures as those pillars that we need to strengthen our capabilities on. Just to share with you, I'm just trying to compare and contrast what we did for the cholera against what is expected of us as a country. When it comes to emergency coordination, they want us to look at the policies, the legal and normative instruments, coordination, finance, and human resource. We were guided by the IHR on the 3rd column, which is the one that we're using as a guide for our response, as well as the issue of having an incident management team. The Global Task Force on Cholera Control Guidelines also came into play. We made use of financial and human resources from the National Department of Health, Gauteng Province, as well as the district. For collaborative surveillance, they want us to have capacities for laboratory surveillance and the One Health approach, where we relied on the National Health and Laboratory Service peripheral laboratories, the NICD for genotyping or identifying the strain of the cholera, and also the issues of water testing. We continue for community protection. They want us to look at issues of preventing infection in the community, vaccination, public health and social measures, risk communication and community engagement, as well as the points of entry and border health. Then we also tried to comply, and we complied, where we looked at the guidelines that we implemented for infection prevention and control. We communicated. We also provided social support to the bereaved family, working together with the Department of Social Development. We didn't conduct any vaccination, but there was points of active surveillance. For clinical care, calls for health service provision and infection prevention and control like we have above. There was an establishment of a temporary cholera treatment unit in Kanana that we used for treating patients, and it was also used to decant patients so that they don't overcrowd the Jubilee Hospital, and it worked very, very well. And the access to countermeasures, we had health emergency management, and the Kanana unit was demonstrating our abilities to work with those issues. Just a pictorial depiction of what we had. This is where we had in Kanana. These were the tents that were erected, and these were standby people. They had the ambulance, the buses. The internal of the tents looked like that one. We also supplied hygiene packs that we distributed, which had chlorine, sanitizers, and all the stuff that the household will need. But we also had to communicate intensively. These are the channels that we use for communication, ranging from the SABC and other aspects of communication. But what are the best practices that we have experienced? It was the integration of lessons that we learned from COVID. For response, we incorporated the concepts of the WHO incident management system and rapid response strategies. There was also strong and present leadership from the managers at all levels that contributed to the overall effectiveness of the response. And we also appreciate the political commitment that we saw, as well as the leadership, ranging from the presidency, the national departments, we had health, water and sanitation and social development, but also provincial and local levels. This further enhanced our response to and effectiveness. We also had effective external communication and dissemination of information with our partners and communities, including the media and the press briefing. There was also promotion of inter-provincial cross-border collaboration, because we also saw some cases that were originating from Ganana in Hammanskraal, but they were then seen in Limpopo, Northwest, Mpumalanga, and other provinces. So we had to strengthen our collaboration across the district borders as well as the provincial borders. What we recommend as a Department of Health, of what we've seen, is that we need to have collective planning and response, which is critical for mitigating public health emergencies and building resilient systems. We also need intersectoral and multidisciplinary collaboration. Why we need that is that we'll be able to maximize available resources. We will reduce duplication and planning processes, and that no one is left behind, because we are talking of everybody who is a stakeholder when it comes to the cholera. But in conclusion, what we're saying is that despite all the efforts by the different stakeholders, the source of the cholera contamination has not yet been identified. However, the interventions have yielded positive results. It is more than 10 weeks since a cholera case has been detected within our boundaries. The country is on high alert to detect and contain the cholera. Any public health event, no matter how small, presents an opportunity to us for us to strengthen our capacities to respond. And most importantly is that preparedness is not optional. I also would like to acknowledge our stakeholders who we're working with as we're responding to the cholera. Thank you, Program Director. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was Tsakani Frumele from the Department of Health. And she timed herself perfectly, like exactly 10 minutes. Now we're gonna hand over to our last panelist, but not least by any means. That is Mr. Martin Kingston. He's promised me that he's going to surprise me by his time efficiency. Over to you, Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Programme Director. Good afternoon, Deputy President, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is fitting that the topic is focused on the social partners' response to crisis situations. Pre the pandemic, it would have been difficult to characterize the post-democracy headwinds we faced as crises of existential proportions, threatening the lives and livelihoods of our citizens and presenting unprecedented challenges to economic and social stability. The ability of social partners to engage and mobilize individually and collectively was seen both in the response to the economic, social and healthcare ramifications of the pandemic, as well as in response to the subsequent civil unrest, the floods and the present economic challenges. In all these cases, we've experienced major crises threatening to undermine our efforts to deal with the growing and unacceptable levels of poverty, inequality and unemployment. Failure to address these issues will fundamentally erode the progress we have made since 1994 and the work of society at large to ensure that we can deliver on the explicit aims of our Constitution to deliver a better life for all South Africans. It is only by harnessing the skills, resources and commitment of social partners that we will be able to avert the worst consequences of any crisis, often unanticipated, and achieve our potential as a country. Interrogating how we navigated the pandemic, identified the key considerations, established and resourced appropriate structures, and communicated with our constituencies provide essential inputs and hopefully equips us with the tools and knowledge to anticipate and react to other similar situations now and in the future. I must commend Nedlac and the Rapid Response Task Team for its speedy mobilization, the flexible and accommodating governance structures that it implemented, and for incorporating social partners into various committees that demonstrated focus, agility and responsiveness to the many issues that arose and for the continuous and transparent communications that took place. The integration of the skills and resources that were required played a significant role in building trust between social partners, ensuring effective intervention during the different phases of the pandemic, and creating a precedent for addressing other crises. The success of the Rapid Response Task Team is a strong justification for focused social compacting. It's now some 3.5 years since the Special Exco was convened at the IDC in March 2020, resulting in all social partners agreeing to the establishment of the Rapid Response Task Team. At the same meeting, the concept of a Solidarity Fund was launched, an unprecedented social response to the approaching crisis. In that case, the structure was conceived, the platform established, the executive formed, and the board appointed, drawn from all social partners, within a month of that Special Exco. We were able to raise over 4 billion rand in donations from individuals, companies, institutions, philanthropies, and governments. We deployed those funds to efficiently target and support key relief efforts for the pandemic, including the vaccination rollout for affected communities in the aftermath of the civil unrest and towards the flood victims. For the first year, more than 100 volunteers worked unstintingly and pro bono to ensure that the skills, resources, systems, and processes were in place to achieve the objectives of the fund, with minimum frictional costs, maximum efficiency, and impact, and full transparency and accountability. A similar approach informed the establishment of B4SA, Business for South Africa, and all of business response spearheaded by the Black Business Council and Business Unity South Africa. Large or small, informal or formal businesses across all sectors of the economy, some not members of organised business, brought skills and subject matter expertise to bear, abandoned brands and egos, and worked together harmoniously and urgently on an integrated basis to save lives and livelihoods. Within the same time frame, we mobilized over 450 people from a wide variety of disciplines, focusing on the 3 work streams of healthcare support, including procuring PPE, working with our social partners within Nedlac to access social relief, and drafting the Accelerated Economic Recovery Strategy, a key input into the Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, whilst also engaging on lockdown levels and workplace interventions. In the second year of the pandemic, B4SA focused on collaborating with government and other social partners on the design, development, and operationalization of the vaccination rollout program, ensuring once again that critical skills were mobilized and partners and funders, such as the Solidarity Fund, could help enable that critical intervention. In all these areas, putting in place appropriate governance and support structures, including a properly resourced project management office, ensuring that there were teams focusing on legal and regulatory considerations, and effective, consistent, comprehensive, and transparent internal and external communications, were essential ingredients to a successful response. As the recently released Nedlac report on learning the lessons, creating a legacy correctly depicts, without the role played by the social partners at Nedlac, the harm to the economy and society could have been very much greater. As the report outlines, it was not always smooth sailing. Despite alignment and consensus in many areas, including the need for effective interventions that were practical and implementable, there was understandable disagreement on a number of matters, such as mandatory vaccination, the banning of tobacco and alcohol sales, opening up the events, tourism, and entertainment sector with widespread ramifications for livelihoods and the economy. Some 1.2 million people working in the events industry were directly or indirectly impacted. It has been estimated that the alcohol ban cost the country some 8 billion rand and put 165,000 jobs at risk, whilst between 4.5 and 6 billion rand in taxes and 300,000 jobs were either lost or jeopardized due to the tobacco ban. However, regardless of the area for focus, there was a willingness to engage, to access data from multiple sources and perspectives, and to seek to align under the auspices of the Nedlac team wherever possible. The structures that were implemented and the agile, proactive, and committed resources that were made available by all social partners built trust and camaraderie. In the face of adversity, we saw social partners forging agreement in key areas, resulting in several successful interventions. These included a much improved understanding by employers of risk-based approaches to occupational health and safety, Significant relief schemes such as the COVID-19 Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, the TERS program, and the Social Relief of Distress Grant, we should applaud the fact that nearly 6 million workers received over 60 billion rand from the UIF. The establishment of the National Communication Partnership to ensure that complex messages were effectively and continuously conveyed, leveraging the resources and communication channels of civil society formations, organised labour, the business community, and all arms of government. We need to internalise and learn from key lessons that emerged during and after the crisis, many of which the Nedlac report highlights. The importance of surveillance systems, particularly in the workplace. Identifying areas where, working together as partners, we could successfully localise the manufacture of key products to support employment growth. In the case of the pandemic, including PPE, ventilator programs, and the production of vaccines. Clear, consistent, and comprehensive internal and external communications to build trust and confidence in the role of government and its social partners. The significance of scientific, rational, and evidence-based inputs which withstand scrutiny and can be crisply articulated. The need to develop appropriate policy responses to societal challenges, including alcohol abuse, gender-based violence, appropriate and safe arrangements for transportation, the workplace, and places for gatherings. Relief measures for future crises, including adequate funding, adaptable and fit-for-purpose structures, and the ability for rapid response interventions, such as could and indeed should have been used for other humanitarian crises, such as civil unrest and the floods. The impact of the pandemic manifested in significant GDP contraction and the permanent and temporary loss of jobs that still reverberate today. Indeed, it magnified and, in some cases, crystallized ongoing structural flaws that have become significant crises in their own right. A year ago, we identified 3 focus areas, as we've heard, of energy, transport and logistics, and crime and corruption, that had the potential to fundamentally undermine any real prospect of recovery, let alone sustainable and inclusive growth. Individually and collectively, they act either as a brake or a spur on our ability to address poverty, inequality, and unemployment. We recognize that there are other areas that also demand focus, but that limited resources requires us to be disciplined in the prioritization of critical interventions and scope for collaboration. The creation of structures such as the National Energy Crisis Committee, the National Logistics Crisis Committee, and the Joint Initiative on Crime and Corruption, and the formation of the Resource Mobilization Fund to access and deploy resources to those structures is a clear manifestation of how we, as social partners, can and should respond to such crises. Business has indicated its full commitment to collaborate, as evidenced most recently by the CEO pledge. Nedlac had a crucial role to play and, understandably, given its experience and convening power, should be called upon again whenever appropriate in the future. Its ability to manage knowledge and disseminate information on a timely basis whilst coordinating and integrating many of the activities of social partners is an area that requires further consideration. A tumultuous and uncertain future confronts us. In the face of the polycrisis we heard about, let us hope that we can take the lessons that we have learned from these past and present crises and respond appropriately by leveraging on combined skills, resources, and commitment as partners in the future. I thank you.
Well done, Mr. Kingston, on keeping to time again. Look, I was supposed to do a summary of this panel and I think I'm not going to do the summary because I'm not going to do justice. I've been told I've got 1 minute list. So I'm being made to test my own medicine. So instead of actually doing the summary of the session, Nedlac has already begun working on all the crises that we are talking about and the disasters. What we are doing here is basically to acknowledge that in the social partnership, the government still plays a leadership role. Then social partners have got responsibilities. We are underscoring that business still has got like a higher responsibility than maybe us as community and labor.
So as we are concluding this, we acknowledge that what we've done is to at least generate a list of the crises and disasters that we are facing, so that we are on the same page, and the various measures that are being taken to respond to this. Nedlac is going to integrate it not as a single working point, but in various structures of Nedlac. There shall be continued responses and there shall be integration of what has emerged from here. So I'm not going to try to summarize beyond that. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to call upon, or maybe before I do, there's an announcement. Deputy President, there's no free lunch. You said you are new to Nedlac. There is the photo opportunities just after we close the session. Then I'm requested that all the guests, the panelists and the speakers, the photos will be taken there, must avail themselves. Nedlac is trying to show who is here so that others who are not here will have a fear of missing out next year. They want to be here by all means. So without further ado, let me welcome the Deputy Minister of Employment and Labour, Ms. Boitumelo Mloi. DM.
Dumelang, sanbonani. Hawu bathumba mudimu. Nizoyithola kanjani? Nizoyithola kanjani? Hayi shame. Eish, right king. Program Director please allow me to also write on the already established protocol and say all protocol observed. I must say, ladies and gentlemen, that it is a great honor for me to extend the vote of thanks on this auspicious occasion. The 28th Nedlac Annual Summit, focusing on resilience and social partners' preparedness for crisis. I would like to first and foremost thank my Minister, Minister Thula Sinxesi, for the warm opening address that he has rendered today. We truly felt welcomed and well informed on the objectives of the summit that the Minister outlined so diligently, and we say to him, Siyabulela Mphathiswa. He's just ran out for some interviews, and that is why he's just missing in this session. Allow me to take also this moment to thank our Honorable Acting President, His Excellency Ndate Paul Mashatile. We appreciate that you have graced this summit with your presence, which is of course your first. And you delivered an outstanding keynote address. You have reminded us of the value of social partnership and social compacting, and the relevance of Nedlac as a social dialogue institution in responding to critical issues facing the country. And I think you also challenged Nedlac to look into the possibility of what in China they call opening up, so that you let others in, that little window of opportunity for other new entrants into the Nedlac, like you have done with SAFTU. I must say, we thank you so much, DP. And I must also say something that I'm privileged to know that I got from the Deputy President, because I'm seated, you know, the issue of close proximity, seated next to the Deputy President. I'm sure most of you might not even know that the Deputy President spent 2 years or so in prison with Mr. Kars Kavodia.
They spent almost 2 years in prison together, and even after their release, they worked together in an NGO, by the way. So this is information that you need to know about as South Africa. Isn't it nice? And they worked together. Actually, they were, among others, their job was to actually educate unions about bookkeeping, amongst others. You know, so I just suggested to the Deputy President that they need to write a book while they are still alive, because there is a possibility that some people will distort your history. So please do that. This is a project in your hands. Allow me once more, Program Director. I must say that I'm very pleased to have seen today amongst us Minister Pravin Gordhan, who has graced this important event. I've seen Deputy Ministers Swartz, Deputy Minister Manamela, the Chairperson and members of the Portfolio Committee on Employment and Labour, Honourable Lindelwa Dunjwa, and I've seen also the whip of the Portfolio Committee, Ndate Nonsele, members who accompanied the chair and the whip of the committee. The current, allow me also to thank the presence of the current and former leadership of Nedlac social partners and Nedlac sister organizations. Thank you for gracing us with your presence at this summit, ladies and gentlemen. And to Nedlac Executive Director, Ms. Lisa Sefter, thank you for your strong leadership that you always provide to Nedlac, and a clear report on the noteworthy performance of the organization of Nedlac. And I must say that having achieved an unqualified audit opinion with very few matters of emphasis, I think it's a great achievement, and I think at this point in time, I must say you deserve another round of applause. To the leadership of Nedlac social partners, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kaskavodia, Mr. Tulani Chefuta, and Mr. Gerald Chwala, thank you for the reflections that you have shared with us today, providing your perspectives on Nedlac's performance. And at this time, allow me to use the powers bestowed upon me now as the last speaker on this program, ladies and gentlemen, to also join our minister to welcome SAFTU into the Nedlac family. Comrade Zolinziba Vavi and your entourage, your team, Niabonwa, welcome. We appreciate the thought-provoking insights that were shared here by the esteemed speakers here before us. Thank you, Ms. Vivienne Pearson, Mr. Shafiq Adams, Dr. Suleiman, Mr. Mkolisi Mgojo, and Mr. Duncan Luvuno. We thank you, and Ms. Sakani Furumele, and Mr. Martin Kingston. And I must say that there's this famous quote by Francis Bacon that says, and I quote, "Knowledge is power," close quote. Indeed, as we leave this summit, we are more empowered and enlightened by your insights, which have helped us not only to understand the crisis we face, but also challenged us to proactively act towards well-coordinated mechanisms to effectively respond to the various crisis-type situations collectively and individually as social partners, communities, and members of society at large. I would also like to thank you, program directors, because if I can't do it, who will do it on your behalf? Mr. Ntlantla Ndlovu and President of COSATU, Mama Uzingiswa Losi, for gracefully directing our program of the day. We were indeed in capable hands, ladies and gentlemen. Asbonge. Furthermore, Program Director, allow me to extend my deepest appreciation to the Nedlac senior governance structures, the Executive Council Management Committee, and their committees for strong oversight and guidance on the work of Nedlac. The Nedlac and PCC management and staff, thank you for your ongoing dedication and hard work to advancing the mandate of this organization. The representatives of Nedlac social partners who serve in various Nedlac structures, for their sacrifice and commitment to effective engagement in social dialogue, addressing the very pressing social and economic issues facing our country as outlined in the Nedlac performance report by Ms. Seftel. Allow me also to acknowledge the senior management of the Department of Employment and Labor. I've seen those that I have seen. I've seen our Inspector General, Mayor Gimwilwa. There's no way that I can forget that you are here. You are part of this, including your team. I've seen Professor Mdwaba, who's the Chair of Productivity South Africa, in this session. Then many others that I might not be able to mention. Thank you to all our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, who have attended this physically and virtually. The Dibini Singers Choral Group, the organizers of this event, those who are behind the scenes that we normally forget about, the media. Without you, this event will not be a success that it is. So, and as I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, already the program director has taken part of my job by saying, and as I announced to you, that those who were our very important speakers who all participated in this session are all invited to join us on my left at that banner of Nedlac for a photo shoot. So also my last... because I'm between you and lunch. So lunch will be served at hall number 4, ladies and gentlemen. So we request that all delegates are kindly requested to proceed to hall number 4 for refreshments, because if you do not do so, it will be fruitless, wasteful expenditure from the side of Ulisa with a beautiful report of unqualified opinion. So please make sure that you go to hall 4 to go have your lunch. The summit has now, ladies and gentlemen, come to an end, and I thank everyone. Have a great day further. Thank you.